Chair calls to order public hearing for Bill 23-026, amendments to zoning code, sections 267-4, 267-60, 267-126 warehouse. This evening we have Director Shane Grimm with us, and also Shabita?
Yes.
Du Bois?
Shobita.
Shabita. So, and Mr. Richardson as well. So if you guys would like to present, we're ready to hear what you have to say.
Can you hear? Well, good evening, President Vincenti and members of the council. I've met some of you, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Shobita Dubois. I'm an assistant county attorney. I'm here on behalf of the Harford County Administration to present Bill number 23-026 at this public hearing. As you're aware, a moratorium on new warehouse permits was enacted in April of 2023. The purpose of the moratorium was to give ample time for the county to review and to address the new rise in large warehouses and related operations constructed in response to the rise in our global economy. The increase in these large warehouses and their unique operational requirements could not have been anticipated by the drafters of our development code, not to mention the need for any special requirements to make such warehouses compatible with existing land uses. This bill is intended to address that issue through an appropriate balance of quality of life for Harford County residents, property rights, economic prosperity, and environmental protections. There's concern about the development of large warehouse facilities on the remaining undeveloped property in the county. I-95 is the only major interstate passing through Harford County, and as a result, it will remain the county's long-term focus for opportunities to provide the jobs and businesses necessary for our county's long-term sustainability. It's imperative, therefore, that the county acts wisely and responsibly to maximize its opportunities along the I-95 corridor for the long-term creation of quality jobs that provide the greatest opportunity for well-paying career opportunities and increased revenue to support our governing institutions. This bill also amends the adequate public facilities section of the Harford County Code to address the timing of infrastructure improvements for water, sewer, and road intersections. These changes take a proactive approach to changes necessitated by growth and development. During the moratorium, the county met with businesses and citizens to discuss ideas and concerns. Further, the county has considered the general economic impact of this bill compared to other uses in the CILI and GI districts. For example, and these numbers are just slightly rounded, the average wage in manufacturing is $72,000, whereas the average wage in warehouse distribution is $43,000. The cost of living for a family of four in Maryland is about $110,000. It's the sixth highest in the country. What does that mean? It means that the average family in Maryland, with both heads of household working in the warehouse distribution industry, would have a difficult time making ends meet. Just a few other statistics for you. Harford County manufacturing produces $448,000 in output per worker, compared to $160,000 per worker in warehouse distribution and e-commerce. A 15% increase in the U.S. GDP over the rest of the current decade could occur if manufacturing sectors restored growth and competitiveness. Manufacturing is the fourth largest industry by GDP, behind real estate, professional services, and healthcare. And I'll just give you a quote here by Dr. William LaPlante, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. As an engine of economic growth, American manufacturers contribute more than $2.35 trillion to the U.S. economy. Every dollar spent in manufacturing results in an additional $2.79 added back to the economy, making it the highest multiplier effect of any sector. So this moratorium gave the county time to determine that we have a robust manufacturing base and the resources and infrastructure to support continued growth in that industry. Manufacturing drives innovation and technological advancement, which in turn improves various sectors in the economy. That's all I have.
Mr. Grimm? Mr. Richardson, you don't have anything to add?
Mr. President, no, as I said, Mr. Grimm is here to answer any technical questions you may have. We're here to answer any questions you may have.
So, ma'am, you mentioned meetings throughout. I think you said citizens. Did you meet with business owners as well?
Yes, sir.
Can I have a schedule of dates and times of when those meetings took place?
I think we can probably get together and find something
I would hope
to
so,
get to you.
yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Council,
Let's see what we can do, and we'll get back to you on that. Let's see what we can get together.
as quickly as you can, please. Mr. Penman?
Mr. Dubois, did I say that right?
It's Dubois.
Dubois, sorry. Mr. Grimm, Mr. Richardson, I thank you for being here. I do have some questions about the legality of this legislation that's being proposed. So I kind of want to methodically go through some of the concerns I have, just to hopefully kind of alleviate and answer some of those questions. I'd like to start on page 1, line number 3. Where it indicates the county studied the impact of existing projects or potential projects. Do you have the results of those studies that you can share with the council?
Bear with me, Councilman. Page 1, line 3.
Excuse me just a minute. Deputy, don't let anybody else in until we make sure that everybody has a seat. Sir, can you find a seat, please? Sorry, Mr. Richardson, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Penman, could you repeat that?
Yes. So page 1, line number 3 indicates the county studied the impact of existing projects or potential projects. Do you have the results of those studies that you can share with the council?
Okay, I don't have anything with me right now. Let me see what we have back in our office.
Were those study results or data considered in the administration's design of this legislation, Bill 2326?
Again, Councilman, for that specific one, I would not have been direct part of that. Let me see what we have back at our offices, and I can fill you in on that and get back to you.
And I understand that you may not have all the answers that I have, but if the studies are built upon this product right here, wouldn't it just kind of be assumption that the data was driven and given and, included in this legislation here?
Some of the data is what I had said to you, the statistics that I gave to you. So the information that was gathered in coming up with those statistics, we have that information back at the office. All of that we can provide to you later.
Okay. So not to give it like, do we know when later? Because I would have thought that it would already been turned over to the council if we wanted to be considerate of what was put into this bill here based off the data.
I mean, I can only say that I can go back first thing in the morning and start getting things together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on. Still on page 1, line number 5, the bill indicates things have changed and progressed since the zoning category was created in 1982. So my question, what changes have occurred since the last master plan use in 2016?
Good evening, Council, and thank you for your question, Councilman Penman. With respect to the master plan that was completed in 2016, Harford Next, there's nothing specific in that master plan that references warehousing. There are definitions in that master plan that talk about warehousing as they relate to the mixed office district and other districts, but there's been nothing specific in the master plan that informed this legislation.
So when you say the changes that have been progressive, was that information used to consider changes or the drafting of legislation?
I think the changes are related to the changes in the nature of warehousing and distribution facilities since the code was conceived in 1982.
Which is what the bill was built off of, the progression of changes,
Correct.
adverse changes, okay. So moving on to line number 9 on page 1 discusses the occupancy rates that have been reviewed for such facilities. What is the significance of those rates as it relates to this legislation? Line number 9.
I don't have an answer for that for you this evening.
Do you have those rates at all? The occupancy rates?
I don't, no.
What- It's cited in here, so we don't have the occupancy rates that were evaluated?
Councilman Penman, we do have those occupancy rates in the Economic Development Department, and I know that we can get those occupancy rates for you. I do not have them with me this evening.
But I would assume that those rates were considered when drafting legislation. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Again, page 1, line number 10, could you discuss the scope of the investigation of the residual issues? Line number 10.
I don't have an answer for that at this moment.
Council member, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe I'll check it to see what specifics we have, but that deals with, in a sense, the impact that's taking place relative to, with- Mike's on, can you hear me? Relative to traffic changes, increase in residences, things of that nature.
But all that scope of the investigation was all used to draft this legislation or
Part of it.
any legislation?
That becomes a part of it.
Line number 14 on page 1, this paragraph discusses meeting with stakeholders, and I know that you had mentioned that just briefly. Just to kind of reiterating what County Council President had mentioned, do you have those meeting dates or minutes for those meetings, and whether the commercial industry leaders, land use attorneys, or engineers were present during those meetings?
I don't believe that minutes were taken during those meetings, but the county did meet with several businesses, individuals who are stakeholders and have an interest in this legislation. And as I said earlier, if you want to get, some kind of list with those individuals, we can provide that to you.
Do you know offhand whether those stakeholders, those individuals were of the commercial industry or land use attorneys or engineers at all?
I can't confirm that.
But whatever, those meetings with those stakeholders were used to draft legislation.
All of that information, everything that's been done since the moratorium, all of that information has been used to create this legislation and to make the decisions to put the language in here.
Well, that's a great point, because the next question I have is, after results of the studies, the research, the evaluations, the meetings, the administration drafted an email legislation to the council on August 14th that allowed for a 1 million square foot warehouse, and that legislation is here. In the email, it suggested the 1 million square foot version was designed based off of a combination of suggestions on the county executive administration and the council, assumingly from the data driven from the studies. So if all the studies and all the meetings and all the data that was comprised was built upon the legislation, this was the first version. So the question is, so if the data produced this, how did we get to Bill 2326?
Councilman Penman, I believe you're referring to a draft you said August 14th?
Yes, sir.
Thereabouts? That draft was sent over in the acknowledgement that there are projects that are out there, that have been out there, that are 1 million square feet. And it was an attempt to say, these are the different paths that we can look at for what is most appropriate for the county. Should we look at allowing warehouses up to 1 million square feet, or should we reduce that? And it was intended to be a discussion with the council as to what we believe that we could all come to an agreement on as the best path forward for this legislation as far as it relates to the size of those structures.
My concern is that all the data that was created or completed was put into this proposed bill on August 14th and ignored to pretty much stop one project and ignore the data altogether. That's the concern I have. Is that what took place?
Take this one.
This legislation, as I've said in previous testimony before the council, is not directed at any specific project. It is to look at how warehousing impacts the industrial districts within the county, throughout the county. And the fact is that while we have a dwindling inventory of industrial lands where industrial uses and warehousing uses can go, that doesn't mean that properties won't be rezoned in the future. I'm not suggesting they will, but obviously we go through a comprehensive rezoning process every 8 years. And, there could be these types of uses that come in the future that we will have to evaluate at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm.
Yeah, Councilman, I think if you want to take a look at it, I mean, you heard the numbers that we've mentioned before.
Pull that mic to you, Larry.
Sorry. With the numbers that Ms. Dubois cited relative to warehouse income versus manufacturing income, that whole panoply of numbers there. The citizens' input, the folks you've heard, you see here today, their input that we have gotten from businesses. With what you got was just that. It was, as the document that you have is marked. It's draft. It's a first rough copy, basically soliciting what are your thoughts. Numbers could be palatable. Let's see where we go, what other numbers show. So that's all that is. That's a draft.
And I get that, Mr. Richardson, but it's such a stark difference from 1 million to 250,000. You understand what I mean? It's a completely different product, but we'll move on. Line number 17 on page 1 discusses economic impact, but I'm not sure the attached fiscal note captures the true economic impact. That's why I submitted a request to the administration on September 15th in accordance with section 3106 of the county code, requesting a fiscal impact from planning and zoning based off the potential zoning changes and amendments to the master plan pertaining to the following matters, and this is in the code. The projected population, type of development, number of units, number of acres, types of services, facilities, necessary expenditures necessary to provide services and facilities, the total net revenue, and the increased accessible tax base to be generated by the proposal, an estimate of the total number, a total annual projected net fiscal impact. The fiscal impact note shall represent the impact for the first 3 years and a projected impact for the next 3 consecutive years. So was that request evaluated and completed in accordance with the county code?
Larry, I can answer. We are currently reviewing that. I've met with Treasury, and we are looking at that analysis. As you know, the charter gives the Department of Planning and Zoning 4 weeks to prepare that analysis once it is requested, and we have discussed that, and an analysis will be forthcoming.
I look forward to that. During the physical analysis, I don't believe there was any consideration given to the consequences of this bill, which basically made an entire industry non-conforming. As defined, non-conforming uses is a use that either has existed either prior to the original comprehensive zoning affecting the property or has been permitted by the zoning regulations in the past, but is no longer permitted because of an intervening change in the law. Therefore, in summation of the recent Maryland Supreme Court case from Prince George's County, concerning non-conforming uses, those warehouses in Harford County that are over 250,000 square foot would essentially become incompatible, and pose a formidable threat to the success of the Harford County zoning code and acquire and injure property values. Those warehouses include, and I have a list of them here, Macy's, over 1 million. Wayfair, over 1 million. The Container Store, 720,000 square feet, which was, new building was done in 2023. Sephora, 655,000 square feet. Sephora, again, with 316,000 feet. Bob's Discount Furniture, 620,000 square feet. Rite Aid, almost 900,000. Electrolux, almost 700,000. Clorox, two of them. Warehouse and production, over 1.2 million square foot. Amazon, 634,000 square foot. Two Frito-Lays, almost a little over 1 million. UPS, 200,000. Ace Logistics, almost 850,000. Fanatics, 500,000. CNS,
Penman, excuse me a
400,000. And McCormick's.
Mr. Penman, hold on a minute. Folks, you know the process here. Please be respectful of the speaker. If not, I will have you removed, okay?
So with that, the question I have is that the passage of this legislation makes all those businesses non-conforming, essentially devastating the local tax base associated with the industrial industry, to a point that none of those, if they went to resale, wouldn't be worth as much. And if they wanted to expand, they couldn't expand. So I don't think any of those considerations were made when this bill was drafted, and that's the concern that I have. The local impact, the economic impact that Harford County could face. Were they considered?
I appreciate your concern for the existing businesses and the business community in Perryman. The easy answer to your question is yes, they would become non-conforming as they would not comply with the code if this legislation was passed.
Do we have a resolution on that at all? This kind of shut down an entire industry?
I wouldn't say it shuts down an entire industry. What it does is we typically get letters from these companies that look at when a transfer is to happen for a commercial property, and they ask whether a property is permitted by right, whether it's a special exception, or in some cases maybe even an illegal use. That's not typical, but we have to respond to those, and I can only assume, not being in the commercial real estate or lending industry, that that has some type of impact to those transactions. I can't speak to the fiscal impact of that. With respect to the non-conforming uses and their ability to continue, non-conforming uses can continue unabated. They don't have to cease at any time. What it does is the code says that if a non-conforming use were to be expanded in the future, it sets out specific requirements for that expansion, and they have to go through the Board of Appeals to be approved.
I think that's an issue, but we'll move on. I just want to go to page 3, line 13, where it really just defines warehousing, but curiously removes the word warehousing in almost the entire bill, replacing it with the word storage. So just a thought, perhaps maybe storage should be defined rather than warehousing, since we're just removing that altogether from the legislation. Page 5, line number 3, the bill discusses building height, which shall be 42 feet. What is the standard height of a warehouse in Harford County now? And then my follow-up question would be if the total building height can be adjusted based off of the decreasing or increasing of the buffers.
I'm not sure I understand your question with standard height. There are warehouses all throughout the county, obviously, or generally large buildings that serve manufacturing type uses. And those heights are all dependent upon the type of use that's within that facility. And each of the zoning districts has different requirements for setback and height. The question related to setbacks and an increase in height, the zoning code has, and for a long time, allowed for an increase in height when the setback is increased at a 1-for-1 ratio. So let's just say your setback, front yard setback was 40 feet, and you increase those setbacks, then you could go up by the same amount, 1 foot.
So the legislation would permit it to be taller than 42 based off the setbacks.
The way the legislation reads, it does not speak to that section of the code. This legislation would be placed within the industrial districts, and there's general guidelines and regulations for all of the industrial districts in the beginning. This legislation doesn't touch that.
So they couldn't increase the height. And
No, I'm saying that legislation, or that part of the existing regulations is not touched by this.
okay. The next one I have is a kind of an important one. It's on page 6, line number 2. The bill stipulates that warehousings can't exceed 50% of the floor space, which is a huge economic impact on the use of the buildings. If we are significantly reducing the size of the building and now reducing the floor space utilized, isn't that an unreal expectation? My question is, why and how was that percentage derived?
In the past, with the zoning code, we've taken uses that are either typically not allowed or typically not found in a zoning district and allowed them to occupy a certain part of the square footage of a building or the overall project. What this does is says that obviously the code or the legislation will allow warehousing subject to certain requirements. And within a project, only 50% of those buildings or the square footage of the overall project could be dedicated to those permitted warehousing uses.
I guess to the opposite side, the manufacturing could be more than 50%, right? So I know that the county has, county executive has spoke about warehouses and box stackers negatively. But when evaluating the intense usages, I would think that manufacturing has a much more intense use in the local community, as far as the environment, the traffic, the impact that's going to take place. So if we're talking about just buildings and traffic and the impact, why is warehousing such a dirty word, but manufacturing isn't? I understand you gave kind of the evaluation on starting pay versus warehousing and manufacturing jobs, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a footprint and the local impact, and we're kind of moving away, removing warehouses from an entire permitted use, a zoning classification, when really manufacturing still has that even more of an impact. Wouldn't you agree?
I wouldn't agree. I would say that it depends on the type of manufacturing. There are various different types of manufacturing that are permitted within the zoning code in the different zoning districts. And as you get in more intensity in the zoning district, specifically GI, and I'll just step back for a minute to give context, there are CI, which is commercial industrial, which is, I'd say, the least intense of industrial uses that are permitted in that district. Then you have LI, light industrial, which is typically where you're going to find technological type uses, manufacturing type uses, which was originally the Office Research Industrial zoning district many years ago, which was dedicated to advancing uses that were related to office research and industrial. And then you have GI, general industrial, and general industrial is where you typically find your heaviest type manufacturing industrial uses like asphalt manufacturing, concrete pipe manufacturing, those types of things. So it's really dependent upon the zoning district that it's in and the manufacturing use that you're looking at.
All right, so next few questions are kind of technical, and I'll kind of go through them really quickly. On page 10, you have line 11 and 15 to talk about 1.5 spaces per employee. And then on line 15, it talks about staging spaces. Why 2 for every loading dock? Is that an industry standard for both of those?
What I can tell you is that in the research that I did to inform this legislation, I looked at various different jurisdictions. A lot of information was gathered from New Jersey and Pennsylvania, that are those states, and their jurisdictions are dealing with the issue of large warehousing and the impacts. And the state of Pennsylvania put out guidance to their counties and boroughs and townships of how they should look at these types of things through a model ordinance, and that is where that was gathered from.
Would you mind forwarding that over so I can use that for evaluation on the legislation as well? And then and on page 18, line 20, it talks about the municipal water system. Basically, you need approval for the municipal water system, and I just don't understand why that is the case, why the county would be regulating industry or warehousing and municipal water systems in their legislation.
I understand your question, and I think that the word municipal may be being misconstrued here as regulating a municipal water system. We have an obligation in the county when providing water and sewer to uses that they meet the standards as specified in the APFO as well as Department of Public Works regulations and guidelines. Specific to water, we have to make sure that adequate water pressure and quantity of water is available to serve that site, specifically for fire suppression systems. That's a big deal. You want to make sure that you have the adequate pressure and enough water to be able to suppress a fire in the event of an emergency. So all this is saying is that we want to make sure that we have all the necessary infrastructure in place, and if there are improvements that need to be made to that infrastructure to ensure that the county, if it's the county water system, that our water system is able to provide the necessary water, or if it's a municipal water system, that that system is capable of providing the water to that system. That's all this is saying. So it's not necessarily regulating, it's ensuring that it meets the requirements to serve those fire suppression systems and to serve the potable water on site.
Has that logic been applied to any other development projects that have been moved through the process to evaluate the other municipal water output or availability?
No, because that's what we're proposing in this legislation.
But just in this one, okay. The next one I have is on page 22, line 15. When it just really just kind of just summarize it, it just talks about the completing all the roads in the development before the occupancy can be approved. And I just wonder, is this a problem the county is facing to where the roads are not being completed as they should? Or, because there should be some bonding requirements to hold the developers accountable if things aren't completed at the end of the development process.
The way I read this section of the code is related to infrastructure, specifically roads and intersections that are required as part of the transportation element plan, which is a component of the master plan, and also as required by the subdivision regulations of Harford County. The subdivision regulations specify that certain roads, as identified in the transportation element plan, have to be constructed by the developer or subdivider. And so this is saying that those roads must be completed prior to the issuance of a use and occupancy. So for example, in this case, there are roads in Perryman that were identified, one which has already been constructed but has not been connected to 715. But this is also not necessarily specifically related to warehousing. And the reason I'll tell you that is that as we move forward with future updates to the master plan and transportation element plan, the county may elect to put other roads that we believe need to be constructed or intersections that need to be constructed. So I would say this is not specific necessarily to the warehousing portion of this legislation. The APF portion of this bill, the APF section of the code has not been updated in quite a long time. So it was my understanding that this was looked at to kind of bring it in line with what's going on out there today and to ensure that the infrastructure that is required as part of our transportation element plan and our subdivision regulations is in place and in operation when those developments go online.
And I understand it to a certain degree, and I think, this Perryman project, I think there, to my understanding, there was agreement that they would complete all the roads, but I just wonder, is that an unreal expectation for other projects that could take place in the future if they're trying to establish the development or the project in phases over the course of 1 to 10 years, depending on how large the project is, if you follow me?
Again, this is more of a holistic look at roads and how they're constructed in the county. And typically, this section would relate to a major road that needed to be constructed by a developer. And a developer that would be developing a property would know that they have this requirement. They should know that they would have this requirement because it would be in the transportation element plan. And then the subdivision regulations would say any developer of that property would be required to construct that improvement. It's going further than it did before to say that that improvement needs to be constructed and in place.
Thank you. Next question, page 23, line 17, the bill addresses traffic impact analysis, where the county is picking the traffic impact company. That's what it seemed to be. But the developer obviously is paying for that. Is that the case? The county picks the traffic impact study analysis?
The intent is for the county to contract with a traffic engineering firm that would review the analysis. And just to give you some context, the way traffic impact analysis work now is the developer contracts with a transportation firm or a traffic planning firm to do that analysis. It is then submitted to the county, and the county distributes it to the Department of Public Works and the State Highway Administration. And State Highway Administration also distributes it within their agencies, MDOT and all their individual agencies, to review and get comments back. Also, our Department of Planning and Zoning, Transportation Planner reviews that document as well. What this does is just take it and says, instead of the developer contracting with it, the county will contract it and manage that development of that traffic impact analysis.
How will that company get chosen, or is it just kind of a rotation of which company gets chosen, or is it just one company every
It
time?
would be typically, I'm not an expert on this, but it would be through the typical process through procurement as we would with any. In the past, I can give you a kind of a relatable thing. Back when we were doing a lot more, or seeing a lot more cell towers in this county, there was a requirement, and still is a requirement in the code, to look at radio frequency to make sure that there's no impacts from radio frequencies from cell towers on emergency operation and their radio frequencies. And we contracted with a firm that had that specific expertise to be able to give us that information. So we would do the same thing with a transportation firm.
Thank you. Just two more quick follow-up questions. And the concern I have, does the passage of this bill conflict with the master plan, which outlines the industrial development in Perryman?
I would not say that it conflicts with the master plan specifically. I would refer to the land use plan. And the land use plan is what designates areas of the county based on a broader than just specific zoning districts. It might say high intensity, low intensity, those things. So it's still consistent with what the master plan shows for the Perryman Peninsula and also for the greater Harford County. It just shows different areas of land use designations, and then those zoning classifications that we have in the code fit within those designations. So I do not see it as specifically in conflict.
Would you say this bill was derived based off of one project, one development project?
No.
That's all I have, Mr. President.
Mr. Bennett?
I appreciate you being here tonight. I don't have a whole lot of questions, specifically because you've always been available to meet. You've always responded to emails for months now. You know, we've had heated meetings, but we've always had meetings. So, I want to respect everybody who's here tonight, and we have 3 hours of public comment, so, I'm not going to use 45 minutes to ask questions, but I do want to ask, I noticed that in the legislation, a lot of these requirements speak to warehousing specifically versus, warehousing and freight terminals. And I worry about that possibly creating a situation where those regulations don't apply to freight terminals. Could you speak to that, and also speak to if that is an issue, if that would be resolved by replacing warehousing with facilities as a word in the code, so that any facility in GI would have to follow the same standards, whether it's classified a warehouse or a freight terminal?
Let me try to unpack that question. Freight terminal, as you know, was not previously defined in the zoning code. And the intent was to give it a definition. But we did not take it any further to give specific guidance or regulations to freight terminals in this section.
If it said facilities instead of warehousing, would then those regulations be applicable to freight terminals?
I'd have to think about that some more, and I couldn't give you an answer this evening.
That was currently just my biggest question as I was going through my notes, because we haven't had a chance to talk about that. But again, I just want to thank you. It's been months of work, a lot of work, a lot of drafts, not just one draft piece of legislation, but, we've sent multiple things to you. You've sent things back to us, many meetings, a lot of work. And it takes a lot of time, because this is a very complex, intricate piece of legislation informed by things going on in many states that we have to read through and understand. in order to really grab hold of the issue. So again, just thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Sados?
Thank you. Two quick questions. Back to the non-conforming use. If a warehouse was vacant for a year and it falls into that category, what would happen?
Nothing would happen. You would have to, the warehouse structure and all that would have to go away for a non-conforming use to be, it has to cease to exist. And we've always taken the position that cease to exist is it's no longer there, including the structure.
Okay. And then, have there been any studies done as what other uses we could have to generate jobs and tax income on these undeveloped pieces of land, CI, GI, LI?
That's a question for economic development, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your question there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sados. Mr. Giangiordano?
Boy, it's all going quick, so thank you for being here. Larry, thank you. Mr. Boyce, thank you. And Mr. Grimm, thank you. So, couple questions. How many trips per hour is a distribution center, a large million-square-foot distribution center producing it per hour? Do we know that answer?
I don't have that answer with
Does
me.
anybody have the answer?
We can get that.
Okay.
I work with my transportation.
And maybe the difference between a distribution center and a manufacturing facility. I mean, if a distribution center is doing, 10 trucks per hour and a manufacturer is, one per every 2 hours. So I'm just curious
I can just answer
on that one.
briefly by saying that we go by the ITE manual, and that manual is a accepted manual across the country that gives different trip generation rates for different uses, whether it be manufacturing, warehousing, and it even goes a little bit deeper on warehousing as a type of warehousing, manufacturing, different types of manufacturing generate different types of trips. And I'm happy to get you those trip generation rates. I just don't have them.
I would appreciate that. Going back to the road situation where something is not finished, like the Woodley Road, I guess, is what you were talking about. And I know in a situation we had prior, and we're dealing with that now, is the property in Bel Air on Plumtree. Before, Walmart was going to build, but the problem with that was they had to improve the intersections of 7 different intersections before they were going to. Now, that didn't mean, and as per our conversation we've had, that Walmart couldn't go in, build their facility, but they had to, before they opened up that facility, they had to do the improvements of 7 roads, 7 intersections along the way. Is that a correct assumption?
I apologize. I'm not exactly understanding your question as it relates to
So
Walmart.
my question is, with the roads and everything, an example being Bel Air Village down there, at one point that was going to be a Walmart store. But
I remember
Walmart,
vividly.
okay, Walmart, in order to finish that project, had to improve 7 roads at a cost of maybe $15 million. They decided not to move forward with that project because of the improvement of the roads. Just like today, somebody can go in, build, apartments in down there, and they can build retail, mixed use, and it can all be done, but they wouldn't get their use and occupancy until the road improvements were completed, unless there was a special exception, correct?
The way that it currently works with improvements is the traffic study identifies what intersections are failing, have a failing level of service, and then the code and our TIA guidelines specify then what we can require as far as improvements. And then those improvements, we work with the transportation engineer to determine at what point those individual improvements need to be put in place. Or, for example, with residential development, we may say, okay, this improvement needs to be done by the 100th unit. But you always have to have those improvements bonded now. You have to have those bonded for construction. And then like the site plan approval letter or the preliminary plan approval letter specifies when those improvements are to take place and be completed.
Who determines that when they're complete before they can occupy that? So if somebody's going to go build this and who says, hey, you've got to improve these 7 roads, or you've got to improve this one road, and you've got to move it or connect it? Who determines that?
State Highway Administration, Department of Public Works, and Planning and Zoning, upon review of the study, once we are satisfied that the study has all the data and information we need and it complies with the guidelines, we look at that and determine what the improvements are going to be. And those 3 agencies determine when those improvements are going to be required, and then they are placed in the site plan approval letter. And the developer has to countersign that letter acknowledging that they know that they have to do those improvements.
Do any of those site improvements have to, before they can open, have to get special, do they have to get a waiver or anything like that before they can open? In other words, if they don't do X, Y, and Z, can they come to us and say, well, we did X, we did Y, but we didn't do Z, we'll promise to do Z, and can we get an exception so we can open up?
The easy answer is no. There's no waivers from the required and road improvements.
Okay, that was one.
And I say the easy, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but, sometimes there are regional improvements that make more sense than a small minor improvement. So it's not a waiver, but if there's a turn lane that requires minimal lengthening, but there is a greater improvement that's been identified by State Highway or Public Works, then we may say, in lieu of this, extending this turn lane, take those funds and put it towards a greater improvement that will have greater impact. So to answer your question, there's no waivers, but sometimes there is looking at what is a better improvement.
Okay. And I understand this, Bill. So if a manufacturer came in that was going to build biomechanical or airline parts or something like that, they can build a bigger facility than a 250,000 square foot distribution or warehousing facility, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I think that's the only questions I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Guthrie.
sorry, I don't be redundant with everything everybody else has already said, but I just thought I'd touch base. We all have received a ton of phone calls, a ton of emails, paperwork piled up, to the ceiling from emails and everything. And so we're listening to all the problems and discussions. And one thing that we've gotten a lot of phone calls for, in fact, I got one today from Coles down on Trumbull Road in Edgewood, who was concerned about the legislation, and they're sitting on 1 million square feet down there, and that they're concerned with what it says. And I assured them, because we've all talked about it, we've all already have discussed how that needs to be fixed, and I'm sure before this is over, there'll be some amendments to grandfather some of that language, so we want people to stop worrying about that part of it, because we're going to take care of it.
Sir, excuse me, sir, is there a question there or just?
No, there isn't.
takes
It's
a-
a statement.
Okay.
I'm afraid to ask another question.
I'm afraid to give you the time to do that.
10 more after that.
Go ahead.
So, do you know, apparently I was told that there was a warehouse in Belcamp that was quite large, that was vacant for a period of time, and that was just split up into 4 separate units. Are you familiar with that facility and what they were split up from, what the original size was?
I'm not familiar with that specific facility.
Mr. Richardson, are you?
Belcamp?
Yes, sir. I think it was Belcamp.
Let me see what I can find out. Do
Okay.
you know an address, street, anything?
Sir, I do not. I talk to a lot of businesses. I talk to some commercial real estate guys. Some of them are not too happy. But then also I talk to a lot of businesses that are in need of space between 25 and 250,000 square feet, and they can't find it. Local businesses that are employing a lot of people, they're having a hard time finding. I'm hearing that from multiple people that, I can't find 25,000, I can't find 50,000, I can't find 100,000. Obviously, if it's 1 million square foot, or something close to that, it's probably only limited to a few people. But, okay,
See what I can find out and get back to you.
thank you.
Thanks. Shane, I want to thank you for being available over the last several weeks, answering questions, bringing forth information. I do want to emphasize the importance of delivering the information that we've asked for tonight in a timely manner. We have a deadline for this, and we want to meet that deadline with no hesitation. So with that, I want to thank you for your presentation this evening, And Ms. Dixon, before you open it up to the public for comment, I just want to remind everybody, we set this schedule for tonight so that we could give each speaker the ample time, the 3 minutes to speak without any interruption. I want to ask you all to be respectful of each other, and I trust that you will listen and do that. Ms. Dixon, whenever you're ready, how many speakers do we have?
President Vincenti, before you continue, can I just ask, there was a list of questions that you had and information that you wanted. Are you able to provide us with that
Absolutely,
list?
yes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are 36 speakers, Mr. President.
Again, just be mindful of each other, respect each other, and call your first speaker. No clapping, no applauding. I hate to put anybody out on the street, but we will definitely do it. We want to move through this and hear every voice tonight.
So I'm going to try to do it by fours this time, so if
By
you can be
what?
prepared.
Fours.
You know, like when they get on the ark, two
Yeah,
by
I hear
two.
you, I hear you.
Ain't playing golf here.
Call your first speaker.
Paul Falacci, followed by Ariana Vendenda Pililamari. Aravinda. Chuck Mizan and Brenda Patton.
Test, 1, 2, 3.
There you go. Name and address, please.
Paul Falacci, 320 Marina Avenue in Perryman. Harford Bill number 23-026 is a positive step in the right direction to make Harford County zoning legislation and rules more community-friendly, more transparent. I want to thank the Castley administration and Jacob Bennett for working together over the summer on this important update to Harford County zoning laws. The opaque process of the past really only benefited a few large developers, large landowners, and their attorneys. They continue to try to bend and change the rules at the expense of the surrounding communities and existing businesses. The time of anything goes needs to stop before all the woods and farmland in Harford County is paved over and replaced with multifamily housing, big box retailers, and mega warehouses. Let's preserve the small downtown feel before it's too late and update the zoning laws to our current realities and the modern age of the smartphones, overnight front door deliveries. The outdated vision of dead politicians from 30 years ago never foresaw the effect of the age of the internet, smartphones, and soon artificial intelligence will have on businesses and commerce in Harford County and overdue for modernization. And these laws are overdue for modernization. This bill needs some important updates that 3P has worked with Jacob to add as amendments, close all the loopholes and bring it in line with industry standards in the Mid-Atlantic region. Limit distribution centers to 150,000 square feet in VB, B3, LI, CI, and GI zones. Limit buildings to 250,000 square feet in CI, LI, and GI zones with added restrictions. Remove freight terminals from B3 and CI zones. Max building heights of 42 feet. Max building coverage per lot to 40%. Max impervious coverage per lot to 60%. Strengthen requirements for larger buffer yards and berms, especially near neighborhoods. No parking or staging areas permitted within drinking water source protection areas. No grading permits issued until required access roads are completed and open to traffic, like Woodley Road to Route 715. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Aravinda Pillalamari, 712 South Shamrock, Bel Air. I would like to echo the recommendations of the previous speaker. I didn't have such specific recommendations, but they all made a lot of sense. I think it was a mistake to classify a 300-acre wetland forest as commercial industrial. Ever since that day, 4 or 5 years ago, we have been attending every hearing at the county level, state level, writing all the letters, trying to save the 300 acres of Abingdon Woods, the trees, the land, the water, the air, the neighborhoods surrounding the schools. You know, we all know that that intersection of I-95 and 24 is already oversubscribed. I think that was part of the reason that maybe have gone into even the objection to the Walmart several years ago, and now the Abingdon Woods project. Almost like every couple of months we get evidence that that road is you know, can't even handle the level of truck traffic that is happening, including this morning. I think we need to, you know, based on what's happening around us, you know, people, you know, when I said we need to come here to speak to protect Abingdon Woods, I can't tell you how many people said that, you know, there's no point, it's all gone, that day that it was designated commercial industrial just spelled doom. But we have been fighting and we have been trying to protect. I think we're all adults. I think we can find a way to save Abingdon Woods. Now, I'm told that this bill would, you know, which has a limit of 250,000 square feet, perhaps is better than the alternative. But even that concerns me, and I'm worried about any amendments that might come up. I'm worried about, I mean, it should never have been designated commercial industrial, but the idea that that would allow freight terminals, which would still cause the loss of the forest in Abingdon Woods, I think you all should find a way to prevent that. You know, we have talked about the millions of square feet of vacant warehouses already in that area. And I think earlier I think my councilman, Giordano, said that there are many businesses looking for warehouses that can't find them. I think that would be you know, that what you could definitely help them connect with some of the existing warehouse space and not pave the way for more. I've heard concern about the resale value of warehouses. I don't think that our primary goal should be protecting the resale value of warehouses when we know that part of the you know, when they build the warehouses, maybe they already have an eye on the resale value, not on the economic development and building good jobs in this district. Last week, one tree captured the attention of the world when it was senselessly cut in England. Even if people told me there was no point speaking tonight, is there no one to stand up for every tree
Ma'am, bring your
in
comments to a
Abingdon
close,
Woods?
please. Thank you. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Well, I'll scoot down a little bit. Good evening, Council. Chuck Mezam, 1812 Park Beach Drive, Aberdeen. I come to speak in support of the intent of Bill 2326, which is to lessen the intensity and therefore impacts placed on communities from large mega freight distribution centers. In that vein, all 5 areas of the amendments provided by 3P should be applied to the bill to ensure that this intent translates into valuable zoning law, and that removes any developer loopholes. Tonight I want to focus on one such loophole, which is the maximum height of a building. Current zoning law caps warehouse height at 40 feet for LI, 36 for CI. However, a developer loophole exists in Chapter 267-60, subsection C, parentheses 5, titled Modification of Height Requirements, and reads, maximum building height may exceed if side and rear yards are increased by width and depth by 1 additional foot for every 1 foot of excess height. So although maximum height is defined in the design requirements use charts, it is allowed to increase from this maximum height to an unlimited height. With this clause in a large lot, there literally is no maximum height, to a warehouse. This developer loophole in the zoning law is what provided the Mitchell Farm Freight Terminal to grow from the initial 40 feet high to its now current plan of 65 feet high. This was a 63% increase in height. It started at 208 million cubic feet and grew to 338 million cubic feet of storage space. To provide context to this magnitude of loophole, the magnitude of change this loophole creates, the freight distribution buildings in Perryman are equivalent to 216 of the apartment buildings proposed in Fallston. 216. With this loophole applied, new plans are now submitted for 352 apartments. So 136 more apartments due to this loophole for developers. If the lot is large enough, currently there is nothing in the code to prevent the height of a warehouse to go to 80 feet, 100 feet. This is a loophole that must be fixed in a future bill for all uses in CI, LI, GI, as well as B1, B2, and B3, where it also exists. But for the matter of Bill 2326, line 3 that states the maximum building height shall be 42 feet must be followed by a statement, such as, and shall not increase per other requirements of this part. Without filling this hole, many of the guardrails added by this bill to limit intensity will be negated. Think about it. This bill requires larger buffers and setbacks, lower total coverage, surface coverage per lot, lower impervious surface per lot. By design, it forces larger side and rear yards. So without the removal of this height loophole, greedy developers are essentially being allowed to stack warehouses on top of warehouses, and we know it will happen. I'm confident this council will join Mr. Castley and the citizens of Harford County, stop prioritizing the rights of large developers, and select landowners over the rights of the rest of the county's citizens. Close the height loophole, vote for 2326, and go Orioles.
Thank you, sir. Name and address, please.
Brendan Patton, 2054 Park Beach Drive. I'm here this evening to speak in support of Bill 23026. Overdevelopment and industrialization in residential areas destroys neighborhoods. We know this. It's a fact. When a neighborhood lacks proper roads, sidewalks, playgrounds, parks, and other public services, the property values drop. The people who can afford to flee the neighborhood do. Those who are left behind are stuck in a downward spiral. As the neighborhood changes character, crime increases, property values continue to drop. First responders and law enforcement are now required to answer more calls in an increasingly dangerous neighborhood. We have all observed this process happen in Baltimore, Baltimore County, and even in parts of Harford County. This downward spiral is absolutely avoidable. Proper zoning codes, zoning enforcement, and equal treatment of all neighborhoods can prevent this. During campaign season, every one of you up there on the dais has said that you're in favor of a healthy Chesapeake Bay and proclaimed your support for fire, police, and other first responders. Talk is cheap. Your actions will speak louder than words. I ask you to support 2326 and show that you stand with your constituents and first responders.
Thanks, sir.
Mike Mason, followed by Emma Peller, James Carmel, and Parker Mitchell.
Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Mike Mason, 158 Ackerman Drive in Stevensville. Come here today before you, council, as a responsible policy advocate and also on behalf of Chesapeake Real Estate Group. We've been working on this for 18 months now, going back and forth. For the progress of where we started and where we are here, I just have to say I'm extremely disappointed in the Castley administration for their lack of preparedness tonight. No DPW director to address APF, no economic development director to direct the economic impact that this is going to be, no studies, no meeting minutes, and possibly a violation of the Open Meetings Act. I just don't understand something so large, why we haven't been brought together to kind of collaborate on this. Chesapeake has come, provided a plan, gone back to talk to Mr. Castley on this plan. We've gone through many different steps to donate land to the community, have green spaces opened up, have water access opened up for the community. This is nothing but just a bait and switch again. This is something that's gone back and forth between both my client and the community and the council. Chesapeake Real Estate Group stands here today willing to collaborate with the county and the community and genuinely come together and study this area and take a deeper dive into this and work with everybody together. By closing down manufacturing and closing down your biggest economic drivers, it is going to be detrimental to the tax basis in this county and the future economic growth. It's a message that sends regionally. When we talk about middle class and the statistic that was brought up there, Pew Research Center, $86,000 a year. That is a middle class income here in the state of Maryland. When we're talking about all these other higher numbers up and down, we're talking about regional aspects of Montgomery and Howard County inside of there, right outside of our nation's capital. So there's a lot of things that are around surrounding that area. I would implore everybody here, everybody in the community, the council, read this bill. Read it, reread it, question it, ask questions about it. It's so important. It's for everybody to really look at this and what the ramifications possibly are. Because when you may be looking at something, there may be something completely different. We're talking about manufacturing and R&D. No one asked the question, how big of a manufacturing facility can be built there? That's the question. There is no size limitation on that. And no one's asked that question here today. Can they build a 2, 3, 4 million square foot building if the right tenant comes along that the Cassidy administration wants here in the county? Those are the things that we need to be asking. Those are the things we need to be talking about as a community with the developer here today. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ask the question.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening, Emma Peller, 1447 Redfield Road, Bel Air. Good evening, members of the council and council president, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I'm here to speak in favor of Bill 23-026 with the addition of amendments. These amendments should include the assurance that forested wetlands should be preserved, even and especially in the development envelope. Tax incentives should be given only to revitalize existing empty warehouse space and not to clear more forested land, and that heavy uses should not border residential areas to promote safety of citizens. Many others have already spoken tonight and will speak about these desired amendments more eloquently than I could, so I'll keep it simple. My presence here tonight boils down to 2 requests: save Abingdon Woods and protect Perryman Peninsula. Do what some of you and others before you have failed to do. Put citizens of this county over the developers who fight for your favor and try to fill your pockets. Put the preservation of forests and rivers first to ensure clean air and clean water. Put people over profits, plain and simple. Look around this room. See and hear these people asking you to listen and act in their best interests as you were elected to do. I'll close tonight with a quote I've shared with you many times before, but remains relevant as ever in this fight. Only when the last tree has died, and the last river has been poisoned, and the last fish caught, will you realize that we cannot eat money. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Hello, good evening. James Carmel, 1207 Sterling Court, Abingdon, Maryland. I'm here today to strongly voice my opposition to SB 23-026 in its current form, because I'm very concerned about any green light to warehouse development in Harford County with their negative community impacts. So I encourage this council to please, instead of looking at how we can support more warehouse building in these and likewise developments, to think about another moratorium, an indefinite moratorium on this type of construction, as long as there are vacant warehouses in Harford County. I'm happy to see that there might be more specific restrictions in the current bill to control the development, but I believe that the county does not need any more warehouse development, and that this will continue to enable the continued destruction of Abingdon Woods in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I've been a Harford County resident and proud homeowner for over a quarter century, and I've been a proud Abingdon resident for over 9 years in the older part of Abingdon, and I love living in this very relative, kind of quiet Harford part of Harford County. It's very close to the site of the historic 1775 signing of the Bush Declaration, and also very near the site of the historic Cokesbury College. So I'm very concerned about the impact on this pristine, relatively pristine and historic part of Harford County. I drive by almost every day, and the already partially destroyed Abingdon Woods is a very troubling eyesore. And I'm very concerned it will be much, much worse if developed with the warehouses.
Putting that development smack in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood would be a disaster for residents. And as someone mentioned today, we often have issues where I-95 gets stuck or backed up, like today with that truck hitting the Route 24 overpass. It's already a problem when we have all this I-95 traffic on Route 7 or Route 40. And this would make it, I think, exponentially worse. So I'm really concerned about that. I want your, our council to really think about that, representing the people of Harford County. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Parker Mitchell, 315 Marina Avenue, Aberdeen. I'm a property owner, and I oppose Bill 23-026. In the last year and a half, there have been 4 separate efforts to diminish our property rights. It started with an illegal moratorium that was vetoed by the last county executive. Continued with a decision not to process Chesapeake's site plan application when the current administration took office. Then next came the moratorium this year to study warehouse issues. No studies were started or completed, even though the moratorium was extended. Now this bill creates ridiculous restrictions and attacks numerous existing Harford County businesses. These companies have invested over $1 billion in the county and provide millions in tax revenue each year. These companies provide thousands of jobs as well. You will hear from many of them tonight, highlighting many of the problems with the bill. I sat in meetings between Chesapeake and the county for over 4 months, including the county executive and his staff. Chesapeake made changes to the plan at the suggestion of the administration, and the meetings produced a conceptual agreement. In fact, in the last meeting on August 30th, the main topic was how to work with the Harford Land Trust to preserve property and provide a bigger buffer for the community. It was understood that the plan would not be adversely affected by pending legislation. Later that evening, the county executive met with the 3P group at their community meeting. The crowd was very hostile to the county executive as he presented the plan he endorsed. His overreaction to that meeting was this terrible legislation proposed just 2 days later. TLI zoning has been in place for 27 years. There was little opposition at the time the zoning was improved. Most of the people opposed to our project moved to the area after the zoning was in place. They did not research the zoning of the properties in the area, and they didn't need to move to Perryman. I mean, Clorox has been in the county since 1992, and that indicated the development and the growth envelope of Harford County, which Perryman is in, and in an enterprise zone. So there are so many issues with this bill that it just should be rejected, and efforts to amend it would be very complicated and inevitably leave more harmful parts of the bill intact. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Glenn Gillis, followed by Stephanie Flash, Chuck McMahon, and Ken Shannon.
Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Glenn Gillis, 1936 Park Beach Drive in Perryman. I'm speaking tonight in support of the intent of the Bill 23-26 to fortify the zoning codes for the betterment of the citizens of Harford County. For 2 years, the citizens of Perryman and their advocacy group, 3P Protect Perryman Peninsula, have been researching and presenting this council the adverse effects of overdevelopment and industrialization of Perryman. We have been clear that the existing burdens need to be resolved, and further distribution center development in Perryman needs to be halted. No more trucks, no more warehouses. During that time, we have laid a fact-based case for the blatant disregard of Perryman and all of Harford County in favor of developers and their cronies that wish to exploit our community. The council has heard numerous testimonies on the existing harm caused by the unchecked dumping of distribution buildings and their inherent environmental, safety, traffic, economic, and quality of life burdens on this disenfranchised community. Not only have we identified the existing problems, but we have worked with the county to implement solutions for these and for future development projects being considered. This bill is a part of the solution set needed to right past and prevent future wrongs. Opponents will argue that this bill is anti-business and will drive away those who want to invest in the county. While this soundbite is meant to stir uneasiness in the business community, it is not fact-based. Truth is that good, healthy businesses and investors will always find value in Harford County's great schools, residential communities, workforce, recreational opportunities, and high bond rating, et cetera, and will want to invest in and sustain those attributes. Those that oppose the intent of the bill are not looking to sustain, but to exploit the county. In recent correspondence encouraging his business clients to speak out against this bill, Mr. Sneeze stated that the business community is in decline and that it is going to collapse under the Casserly administration. It is ironic that somebody that has been touted as being the fixer for the developers and business community for decades now is blaming the supposed decline on his clients' enterprises on a county executive that's only been in office for barely 10 months. Our remaining land is precious and not a renewable resource. Once gone under the concrete of distribution centers, it is gone. The appropriate and well-planned use of our resources is the obligation of the government and should be managed for all the citizens' good. This bill is a part of the codification of those obligations that you have. I encourage you to support the intent of this bill. Should you act in any way to nullify the intent, you are failing to meet your obligations to protect the county and its citizens' quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Good evening. Stephanie Flash. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Harford, 1902 Norwood Court, Falston. Friends of Harford supports the legislation as the first step to addressing the large-scale development that threatens Harford County's quality of life. The updated definitions, special conditions for facility sizes, and the design requirements are necessary for balancing economic growth with the costs of supporting infrastructure, environmental protections, and safety. Other states, as mentioned earlier, and I would encourage you to look at New Jersey and PA, are also creating policies for large-scale warehouses due to the rapid change of growth as it impacts of large freight terminals and warehouses are found to have negative impacts on the way we live in the northeastern United States and along the I-95 corridor, as well as here in Harford County. Friends of Harford views this bill as an essential step in navigating the future of e-commerce in our county in an equitable way. We urge you to support this bill as written, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening. I'm Chuck McMahon, 445 Charles Street Avenue, Towson. I'm here on behalf of MCB Real Estate. We are owners of 2 warehouse properties in Harford County totaling over 1.1 million square feet with a value of over $100 million. I am the face of one of the impacted stakeholders that Mr. Penman referred to earlier, and I would just like to talk a little bit about how this will impact us and our investment in Harford County. This bill contains restrictions that, if enacted, would cause zoning and use nonconformance for our properties, and as a result, when leases expire, we would be unable to attract new tenants of similar size and business type. Without the rental income of those new tenants, we'd be unable to pay our mortgage, and we could lose our buildings to foreclosure. Banks would no longer be willing to lend on these properties, and the assets would become almost worthless. Investors would lose millions of dollars. The resulting assessments and property tax revenues to Harford County would drop precipitously. We strongly oppose Bill 23026 and the underlying policy objective being advanced by the county. Over the past 2 decades, Harford County has emerged as a desirable location for institutional investments in industrial real estate. Millions of square feet of warehouse space have been built and traded in the capital markets, and thousands of jobs are now housed in that real estate. This bill would reverse that forward progress and label Harford County closed for business with institutional investors. I ask that you please don't let that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Name and address?
Good evening, Ken Shannon, 2044 Park Beach Drive in Perryman. I'm here to testify in favor of Bill 23-026. I appreciate that the county executive and county council are putting sensible guardrails around the unrestrained explosion of industrial development in what had been peaceful communities by updating the Harford County zoning code to reflect today's realities. I'm glad that the Castley administration and the current council had the presence of mind to invoke a moratorium to allow time for thoughtful consideration for how industrial development could be properly integrated into Harford County. Besides the legislation that has been offered, I support the suggestions that the Protect Perryman Peninsula Coalition has offered. These recommendations are focused in 5 areas: properly defining terms like project, lot, and developable, refining metrics for intensity of use and impact, clarifying permitted use charts, incorporating sufficient stormwater management requirements, and including special requirements for speculative projects. I'd like to focus tonight on the special requirements for speculative projects. I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that I am opposed to any industrial development on the Mitchell Farm, and any comments I make related to the thoughtful integration of industrial development in Harford County is not directed at that property, since its location next to the Bush River and in the midst of a residential neighborhood makes no sense for industrial development. The recommendation from 3P for speculative projects that I'd like to speak about is that requirements be codified that the developer and subsequent owners give adequate notice to the community of future uses of the property, and that Harford County review and approve the new use. If there are substantial changes, and it's crucial that substantial be properly and clearly defined, then the development would be required to go through the complete development process. We've already seen in Perryman why this is necessary. Almost exactly 1 year ago, September 27th, 2022, the Chesapeake Real Estate Group submitted updated preliminary and site plans for the Mitchell property development that increased the height of all freight terminals from 40 feet to 65 feet. They did this without notifying the neighbors of the Mitchell Farm, the residents in Perryman, or the political leaders in Harford County. Craig knew that the community was opposed to the freight terminals at their originally proposed height, but still, these rich speculators who don't live in Harford County and whose business is not located in our county have added 130 million cubic feet to their irresponsible plans. Earlier tonight, Craig's lawyer from Stevensville, I'm not sure where that is, called the administration's actions related to this bill bait and switch, adding 130 million cubic feet to their development without telling the community. That's bait and switch. We need to protect Harvard citizens from unscrupulous developers who have no regard, no respect, and a seeming hostility towards residents. Developers would take the money and run, leaving behind a half-mile-long building, 65 feet high, surrounded by other monstrous freight terminals in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The current zoning code allowed this developer to increase the size of their buildings by 63% without requesting input from impacted neighbors, without even notifying neighbors, the community, and political leaders. A zoning code
Please
like
bring your
that,
comments to a close, Mr. Shannon.
a zoning code like that is broken and
Thank
needs
you,
to be
sir.
fixed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janine LaCour, followed by Holly Comas, Lee Maddox, and Matt Lowerway.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Janine LaCour, 1820 Park Beach Drive, Perryman. Thank you. I know a lot of work has been going on. I had some prepared marks, but there's been a lot of comments that I am shifting around here tonight. I do want to say that I am in favor of Bill 23-026, considering the amendments that are proposed. We are here today because there have been a lot of loopholes, and they just need to be addressed. They need to be tied up. We need a very clear zoning policy that all the players can play by. There were some comments that were concerned about this proposed bill is going to have a devastating economic impact. And I'd like to say that this community, and let's be clear, we're talking about Perryman in many of these cases, but everything that's happening in Abingdon Woods and Falston, it's all coming together here. But the Perryman community has been fighting for over 40 years. And we are looking for adequate infrastructure. It didn't happen for Perryman, but it needs to happen everywhere else. So when they talk about APF, adequate public facilities, and there was a comment, surely things don't get built without adequate public facilities or infrastructure. Well, let me tell you, for all these years, and the time we've been here, I've been up here at least 4 times talking about not implemented. Have I said that before? Yes. And most recently as June 12th. So there are over a dozen concerns we've had about inadequate public infrastructure. Things have been allowed to build, and the infrastructure has not come in. It's been promised, and it has not occurred. We need roads fixed, we need sidewalks, we need height monitoring systems, and all the communities deserve this. The other part I want to talk to is that if we think this is an economic engine and communities are going to be devastated by a lack, it's just not true. Because Perryman has been so blessed by the attention of commercial, industrial, illegal, freight warehouse distribution terminals. We can be proud to say that in Perryman, the median household income is 64% less than Harford County. We also have 23% more African Americans who live in Perryman. And this is according to an Aegis article on March 11th, 2022.
Ma'am, please bring your comments to a close.
So the prosperity has not occurred.
Thank you,
and
ma'am.
should be ashamed.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening, President Vincente, members of the council. My name is Holly McComas, 1826 Park Beach Drive, Perryman. Residents of Perryman and anywhere else facing similar development are facing a two-pronged threat: the dangers of sharing the road with heavy trucks and the pervasive health risks posed by diesel emissions. Any council decision to consider new industrial development in an area previously surrounded by well-established residential neighborhoods contradicts well-established research on public health and safety. Firstly, let's talk about the roadway dangers. In 2020, large trucks contributed to 11% of all fatal accidents in the U.S., despite making up only 4% of registered vehicles. Trucks have substantial blind spots, increasing the likelihood of accidents during lane changes. Underride accidents, where cars actually slide under the trucks, are often fatal. Trucks are also more prone to rollovers and take longer to stop, creating it more difficult and dangerous for car drivers. Now let's switch gears to diesel emissions. These emissions carry toxic mixes of pollutants and particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. The most vulnerable are children playing outdoors and our elderly living in their homes. These pollutants lead to an increased risk of respiratory issues, heart disease, and birth defects. Remember, the Environmental Protection Agency found that people living within a 3-mile industrial facility, within 3 miles, are 77% more likely to die from respiratory cancer. The practice of placing industrial facilities near residential zone is not just unwise, it's unjust. It disproportionately affects low-income communities, communities of color, labeling them as sacrifice zones. They bear the brunt of negative impacts from health to property value. This policy is a form of environmental racism and needs to be called out as such. In conclusion, I strongly encourage the County Council to stand on the right side of history, support the bill with the 3P amendments, take this opportunity to demonstrate a commitment to social and environmental justice. Do no further harm to Perryman or its residents. Don't make things worse by piling on more burdens to an already struggling community. Doing so will only deepen the wounds of justice and disregard for human well-being. Choose to protect us, not sacrifice us. And it's my experience that those who suggest bait and switch are probably the best at it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address.
Good evening, council members. My name is Lee Maddox, 1700 Church Point Court, Perryman. And today I'm here to support the intent and address two critical issues concerning Bill 23026. Firstly, on the matter of legislative clarity, the bill refers to the transportation element of the Harford County Master Plan. However, recent exchanges with Shane Grimm and Jefferson Blumquist clarify that no standalone transportation element exists. It's now a chapter in Harford Next. Perhaps that section of the bill was meant to reference Harford County's annual MDOT priority letter. Not sure. Incorporating this public official document can remove ambiguity from the bill. So I ask the council, don't vote on legislation you don't fully understand. If you proceed without clear definitions, the judicial system may not lend credence to your interpretation of your own code in future cases. Now let's focus on Perryman's residential landscape. Perryman isn't some undeveloped land waiting for industrialization. It's home to 17 distinct residential neighborhoods. And this isn't historical data. Homes have been constructed as recently as 2023. And we're not a community still finding its footing. Well, it anchored here with some homes built in 1766, 9 years before the first shots were fired at the American Revolution. From mobile home parks and senior apartment buildings to HUD housing and river communities, Perryman is a mosaic of different kinds of homes and families. Our HUD housing, like other forms of housing here, exists under conditions that directly impact the health and well-being of its residents. Co-locating industry in the middle of these vibrant, diverse neighborhoods doesn't just pose immediate health risks. It also disproportionately burdens low-income and minority communities and devalues property. Residents of Perryman are not abstract statistics. They are families with kids playing in yards, elderly individuals who deserve peaceful twilight years, and young adults looking for safe and healthy start to life. The county has a duty to protect all of its citizens, not just those with industrial interests. We are not asking for special treatment. We're demanding fair treatment. And I want to clarify, when we call for environmental justice reforms, we are not labeling President Vincente and the rest of the council as prejudice. These detrimental policies were put into place long before you assumed your office. They're on par with redlining and racial profiling and other established forms of systemic inequity. But let's not make any mistake. If you choose not to change your course, you're contributing to a system that disproportionately affects vulnerable communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Matt Laraway, 633 Cantor Way in Baltimore.
I'm a partner at Chesapeake Real Estate Group, and we are the contract purchaser of the Mitchell property located on the Perryman Peninsula. For over 2 years, we've been working towards receiving entitlements on the property. All of our initial meetings with Harford County officials were positive, and for well over a year, all the departments in the county provided timely responses to plan submissions, and in fact, we got final approvals from all departments except for 2. Starting when the Cassidy administration took office, the county refused to comment on our plans or even meet with our team to discuss any accommodations that we'd be willing to make to temper any concerns of the county or the community. It was 6 months into the new administration that we were accommodated for a meeting. This did lead to a series of meetings. None of these meetings as stakeholders were we asked to provide any input on legislation. However, there was significant site redesign, changes to building sizes, agreement to construct more on-site and off-site traffic improvements, and that we would delay our permitting and construction commencement until the completion of Woodley Road. Additionally, we agreed to consider a sale or donation of as much as 140 acres to the county for parks, buffers, and a consistent waterfront connection for the community. Lastly, it included a very significant phasing in which we would have the ability to construct about half the revised plan while holding the balance of the site aside for future Harford County economic development. The county is intent on our pursuit of manufacturing, R&D, and government contracting uses for a large portion of the site. After all these meetings, I was told that we'd created a plan that was, quote, palatable, and certainly I had the expectation that we were close to an agreement. Without any prior notification or heads up from the county, on September 3rd, we were forwarded a copy of Bill 23026, which was in direct conflict with all of our discussions that we'd been having up to that point. This bill is not a text amendment to the zoning code. It's an obvious and targeted attempt at a spot rezoning out of cycle. Warehousing and distribution have always been permitted uses in all of the zones referenced to this bill. Contrary to the bill stating it hasn't been revisited since 1982, the zoning code was rewritten in 2008, and the last comprehensive rezone was in 2017. The bill was written without any communication or input from the development or occupier communities. It's obvious that there was no input from anyone that has any logistics experience, as the design criteria proposed in this bill will render existing and new buildings unusable by most occupiers and employers in the region. This is not only an assault on property rights, it's also an assault on Harford County's labor force, a lot of which lies in the industrial arena. If any employer has a warehouse component to their business and needs to grow or change the way they operate, the bill will render all of their available alternative sites in Harford County not available for their use, and they'll have to go elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Frank Hertrich, followed by Isaac Ambruso, Rich Norling, and Sarah Price.
Call your first speaker again.
Frank Hertrich.
Call your next speaker.
Isaac Ambruso.
Good evening, sir.
Evening.
Name and address, please.
Isaac Ambruso, 635 25th Street South, Arlington, Virginia. Hello, Chair Vincenti and members of the Harford County Council. For those of you that I have not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Isaac Ambruso, and I'm here representing the Maryland Building Industry Association. This bill has tremendous implications for the building and development industry in Harford County. MBIA members have reviewed this legislation and identified numerous potential code conflicts that will create confusion and potentially make implementation of these changes impractical or impossible. Further, this legislation treats all warehouse projects as though they are one-size-fits-all developments, and it poses unreasonable requirements on developers, requiring them to provide design criteria when that information is not necessarily known at the outset of a project. These requirements taken together, such as new distancing, dwelling, buffer yards, etc., are borderline property taking by the government. There is no grandfathering language in the bill, which means that existing projects that are currently legal and lawfully approved may be in a situation where investors and developers and property owners will be out significant investment even if they have complied with existing county regulations. While I am gratified to hear that this, at least, will be corrected, the fact that this obvious flaw was not considered before the legislation was introduced shows the poor foresight exhibited in this bill's construction. In short, this legislation will have long-term harmful effects on the county by eliminating significant investments, alienating employers, reducing economic activity and county revenue. In order for developers and builders to operate, there must be a consistency of process. Changes such as this signal to businesses in the county that they must look elsewhere to invest their time and capital. This is a major long-term economic loss, as these businesses and the businesses that depend on these projects will move their economic activity elsewhere. I urge you to vote down this bill, and if changes must be made, they should be given time, consideration, and the opportunity for input that such a weighty piece of legislation deserves.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Name and address?
Hi, Rich Norling. Is it on? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Rich Norling, 3121 East Nobles Mill Road in Darlington in Harford County. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Maryland Sierra Club tonight. I want to thank everybody in the administration and the council members and the council staff who worked on this legislation, and I urge that it be passed. I think there are a few amendments, some of which have already been mentioned tonight, which would strengthen the bill. As I see it, one of the main purposes of zoning law is to protect the people who own and live nearby the property that's being, assessed for, looked at for use. Some uses are obvious, stinky or noisy, or perhaps, have danger of fire or explosion. And regulating the use of the property is the way to deal with those types of issues. The other type of issue, which this bill starts to deal with, is problems of scale and size. A bakery, if it's just a neighborhood bakery, is not a major danger to its neighbors. But if it happens to be a large regional bakery, like the one in Baltimore City, then it has much more impact on its neighbors. And the same with warehouses. The larger the warehouse or the larger the freight terminal, the more impact it has on the neighbors around it, clogging the roads, impeding emergency services, et cetera. So I would recommend, first off, that freight terminals be addressed more specifically in the bill. Right now, there is no limit on the size. If you don't have time to work on, specific rules in the legislation, perhaps change it from a permitted use in CI to a special exception, so that a hearing officer and ultimately the council could review the specific rules for that development. One other issue I'd like to mention is these are very large buildings we're talking about. 150,000 square feet is almost 3.5 acres for people that think in terms of acreage. 250,000 square feet is 5 3/4 acres. These large flat roofs are the best places to put solar electric generation. The state has a major goal to increase the amount of electricity generated by solar, and Harford County could do your part just by making sure that the roofs of these large buildings are strong enough to support the weight of solar collectors. You don't have to require them to put the solar collectors there. The economics will be in their favor. But just making sure that the buildings are solar ready would be a major step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President, honorable members of the council. My name is Sarah Price, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Alliance. My address is 318 Marymount Court in Pasadena. As I mentioned, I am here on behalf of a membership association that represents retail businesses from all across the state, from Oakland to Ocean City, including a partnership with the Main Street Maryland program, so I do work directly with downtown Bel Air. Shopping trends and consumer expectations have shifted drastically since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has included an enormous trend toward home delivery. Many customers believe that when they place an online order, particularly from a large business, that order should be on their doorstep within 48 hours. In order to meet these expectations, businesses need a robust infrastructure of manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution centers, and these need to be located near transportation hubs and major highways. Harford County benefits in being able to attract businesses due to the proximity to the I-95 corridor and the Port of Baltimore. This bill, as introduced, includes very restrictive language regarding building operations and how businesses can use their property. And we have heard many concerns from businesses located here in the county that they fear that for their ability to continue to operate should this pass as introduced. So at an absolute minimum, we would urge you to consider amending the bill to clarify that these restrictions would be prospective only and would not impact existing properties. We have also submitted additional amendment recommendations by email to each of you relating to maximum building coverage, impervious area coverage, parking requirements, and the use of gross floor area. Our suggestions would mitigate the impact of this proposal on existing businesses and would also help avoid a monopoly of those existing businesses so that they're not the only ones operating here in the county. We would just ask that you seriously consider every impact that this proposal would have on the community before you choose to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Nancy Post, followed by Ron Stuczynski, Janet Hardy, and Tripp Bailey.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Nancy Post, 411 Green Tree Circle, Abingdon. I want to remind you that citizens reside in Harford and not just businesses. I support Bill 23026 with amendments proposed herein and by the county exec, Casserly and Abingdon's Woods, Perryman Peninsula, Friends of Harford, and other advocates for preserving natural habitat, good health, and positive quality of life for Harford citizens. We want loopholes to be eliminated and not built into the legislation. We do not want to play whack-a-mole or a shell game with terminology. Warehouses versus freight terminals versus tomorrow's new term. The term building or structure should be used, and the maximum building size per zoning designation must be specified, regardless of the resident business type. Abingdon Woods should never have been rezoned as commercial industrial. It is our last contiguous forested wetland in southern Harford and is in the Otter Point Creek watershed. Sedimentation is already occurring in the Ha Ha Branch stream as a result of the assault on Abingdon Woods. Residents on Pumpkin Patch Court used to see woods. Now there is an anemic single row of trees which do not block sight or sound of the developer's destruction of Abingdon Woods. Residents have already lost significant value and quality of life in their homes. The loss of some 100 acres of trees has increased the road noise pollution heard miles away. The Abingdon Business Park Plan shows parking spots for 1,752 cars, 97 trucks, and 314 trailer drops. Common sense reveals that residential roads cannot accommodate this onslaught of vehicular traffic and its pollution. Rush hour already clogs our southern Harford roads. Approximately 10 years ago, I ended up driving in a circle, ending up where I started in an hour, because of an accident on Route 95. Major roads were packed with cars. If an emergency evacuation was ever needed in southern Harford, such as in Maui due to the fire, it would be impossible to exit the region even if in its current overbuilt state. People will die. Another concern is huge business parking lots are mostly empty, even before the pandemic. Whatever lot size calculation is used by engineers needs to be modified so irreplaceable habitat remains instead of being replaced by impervious, mostly empty parking lots. Environmental mitigation plan criteria needs to be revised so they are specific, enforceable, and require substantive details. They must require science-based explanations on how the developers' remediation will actually provide real and measurable environmental mitigation and not just be a meaningless
Ms.
check.
Post, please bring your comments to a close.
And not just be a meaningless checkbox that gets
Thank
a
you,
mark
ma'am.
on a development project list.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address?
Good evening, Council. Ron Stuchinski, 319 Marina Avenue, Perryman. Almost 2 years since our original community input meeting, and here we are, finally with a chance to fix our outdated county zoning code that has done nothing but pad the pockets of corrupt county officials, out-of-town developers, and self-serving greedy lawyers. It's time to protect the everyday tax-paying citizens of Harford County. It's time to end environmental racism and sacrifice zones and the excessive traffic, unsafe roads that we have, protect our county's history, protect our drinking water, protect our waterways, end illegal development, protect property values as stated in the zoning code, and enforce the zoning rules and regulations that have been ignored for years. Mr. Penman, I didn't have some questions, but I do now for you. Why are you so supportive of the destruction of our community in Perryman? First question. Is it because it has nothing to do with your district? 'Cause every mega warehouse you mentioned is in our 5.6 square mile community, which currently has 39% of all the county's warehouses. Building the proposed project, covering over 5 million more square feet, would then cover 58% of our community and rank as the 7th largest warehouse community in the United States of America and the 13th largest warehouse community in the world. What you fail to mention is that a portion of those warehouses are currently operating illegally thanks to the lack of zoning enforcement by the previous administration. You also failed to mention that roads were promised by the prior administration that were never completed prior to development as required. What interest do you have with the developers? Do you want to answer these later, or I can come back and answer them for you? Personally, I'm sick and tired of the fake developer Facebook accounts, of misleading information, illegal spam texting, the misleading robocalls and speeches being read by council members that are written for them by their lawyers, lobbyists, developers, and advisory friends. It's time to represent the citizens of the districts that you were elected to represent, not the developers, lawyers, or past administrations that, as they say, are here to mentor you. Is Joe Snee here? Patiently waiting for this day since Joe Snee's last-minute plea for help email came out 4 days ago. Typical fake lawyer news about the warehouse legislation affecting all of our local businesses. Joe, your continued support of environmental racism and development of sacrifice zones is disturbing. I'm surprised your slogan isn't, "To hell with the impact of local communities." And in no way is the business community going to collapse under Bob Casserly, as your email said. That's all political BS. Funny that you had no issues with the prior administration and its turning of a blind eye when it came to violations on job sites or the lack of zoning code and enforcement. What's going to collapse, actually, are the corrupt politicians and their friends in Harford County. I can personally guarantee it. If some of you don't believe me, just ask our prior District F representative. Oh, and don't worry, Mr. Snee. I'm sure that the local tanning salons and watering holes will be just fine without your developer friends destroying more of our county. Stand strong with Perryman, stand strong, Perryman, and we stand strong with Fallston. We're all in this together. Support Bill 23026 and 23027. Thank you.
Good
Good evening,
evening,
ma'am.
Council. My name is Janet Hardy, 1423 Abingdon Road in Abingdon. Tonight, I'd like to thank Mr. Vincenti for telling us at a meeting recently that we would be pleased with the legislation that they were going to introduce. And I'm here to say that, yes, it is a good start, and I believe that we should limit the sizes of our warehouses in this, 2 of these residential areas. And I support Bill 26, and I ask that you all to support it also. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address?
Trip Bailey, 511 West Lancaster Avenue. I appreciate the opportunity tonight to speak, to voice my opposition to the proposed warehouse zoning legislation. I am here tonight on behalf of Johnson Development Associates. We own commercial property in the county. We have been doing business in Harford County since 2019 and have invested tens of millions of dollars to purchase, construct, and improve our properties. To begin, I would like to convey my company's belief that the legislation represents an illegal taking of private property, as there is no proposed compensation to the affected property owners. Mr. Penman, you correctly pointed out that the legislation basically creates a situation where every existing warehouse in the county would be considered a non-conforming use. And in your Q&A with Mr. Shane Grimm today, the question was asked as to what effect that would have on existing properties, and Mr. Grimm referenced the zoning conformance letters that his office processes for property owners. And he stated that he's not exactly sure how people in the industry use those letters. I'd like to explain how we do use those letters in the commercial real estate industry. Those letters are used during due diligence to evaluate a potential transaction. And those potential transactions are buying a building, lending on a building, or a tenant considering moving into a vacant space. If the letter from Mr. Grimm's office comes back and says that the proposed use is non-conforming, that is a huge red flag for that transaction, and almost certainly it will not move forward. So that will mean that the buyer will not invest and buy the building. It will mean the lender will not lend on the building. And it means that the tenant, considering relocating into that space, is going to decide to move somewhere else rather than move into that space. And all that's going to do is it's going to create a situation where the county loses jobs, it loses some of its industrial base, and it's going to lead to increasing vacancy rates in the county, which is going to drive down property values. There are many issues with the legislation as drafted, but as I said, the biggest issue is that it would affect existing buildings and projects that have already received approvals. My company recently purchased additional land for another project in the county in which we've invested over $10 million and had plans this year to invest more than $75 million. Over the past 2 years, we have operated under the existing set of rules and made investment decisions based on approvals received from the county. It would be completely unfair and significantly financially damaging to our company for the county to now decide that the rules upon which we have been relying have changed. Due to the many flaws of the legislation, I urge council to vote against the bill. At a minimum, the legislation needs to be amended to add a grandfathering provision to exempt existing buildings and projects with approvals in place. The grandfathering provision should also apply to the proposed changes to the county's adequate public facilities ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Kate McDonald, followed by Tracy Geisel, Mary Lee Stritch, and Gina Tillery.
Didn't see him in there. Okay. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Kate McDonald, 2100 Park Beach Drive, Perryman. I'm here tonight to express my support for Bill 23-026 with the amendments proposed by 3P. While it's unfortunate that it's taken Perryman almost 2 years to get here, it's reassuring that a few of our county leaders seem to finally be listening and modernizing its zoning codes in an effort to protect its citizens against egregious and ridiculous development plans like the one proposed by Craig on the Mitchell Farm. It's time to stop littering our county with mega freight distributions, bringing all their trucks onto our roads, destroying our infrastructure, and poisoning our citizens. These are the 2023 numbers by the Clean Air Task Force for our area. Maryland is ranked 8 out of 49 states for cancer risk from diesel soot. For Harford County this year, they project 9 deaths attributed to diesel pollution and $105 million in monetized health damages. 525 tons of nitrogen oxide, 19 tons of PM 2.5, the most deadly diesel pollution, and 53 tons of VOCs will be released into Harford County's air and ultimately our water this year alone. While those numbers are for Harford County in general, we can all agree that people in Bel Air, Fallston, Forest Hill, Darlington, and Street don't have thousands of diesel trucks passing through their communities each day, every day, all year long. Only South Harford County has that. You could sit there all day and say, this is in the development envelope. This is the playbook we've been using for decades. This property was zoned light industrial in 1997, and it still doesn't make what's happening in Perryman right or legal, for that matter. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development and implementation and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. The EPA says fair treatment means no group of people should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, governmental, commercial operations or policies. As Mr. Penman pointed out earlier, Perryman is home to approximately 12 million square feet of warehouse distribution centers, a power plant, 2 wastewater treatment plants, a rail line, and a military base. I'd say that's pretty disproportionate. And just to venture off, this is a 5.2 million square foot project. In the front and backyards, it is surrounded on 4 sides by residential homes. It is irresponsible, it's negligent to approve this. I mean, this is a 24/7 operation. It's not going to shut down. It's egregious. I can't even believe it's 2 years and we're still trying to convince you that this is an awful idea. We will continue to fight for our health, the health of our families, our vulnerable neighbors, and our homes. We are going to continue to fight for updated and environmental impact studies. We will. And we will continue to fight for basic human rights, such as clean air, safe ingress and egress to our homes, and safe drinking water. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ma'am.
Hey guys, 2104 Park Beach Drive, Aberdeen. I'd like to thank Mr. Penman for listing almost all of the warehouses on the Perryman Peninsula. I'm in support of modernizing the zoning code and stopping the development of mega freight distribution centers in all of Harford County. From the land of pleasant living, if you're a longtime Maryland or Harford County resident like I am, I moved here in 1964, you will remember this slogan. From the land of pleasant living was the national bohemian slogan for life on the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the United States, the largest in North America. Estuaries are home to unique plants and animal communities that have adapted to a brackish water life. The Bush River is a tidal estuary which runs into the largest estuary in North America, the Chesapeake Bay. The overdevelopment of the Perryman Peninsula will mean more runoff into the Bush River, which will mean more runoff into the largest estuary in North America. The overdevelopment of other areas of Harford County will mean more runoff into other tidal estuaries. With the runoff the county has allowed into the Gunpowder River, the tidal estuary of the Chesapeake Bay, with the Ridgely's Reserve development, it is likely no one will care about the runoff into the Bush River. The grasses we are seeing in the Bush River will be affected just like the grasses which are being depleted in the Gunpowder River. According to the Maryland Department of the Environment, in fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, Harford County cited 252 sediment and erosion control violations. They stopped work 19 times, but levied no penalties. Not much of incentive for improvement from the developers. In 2023, the county issued penalties to the developer of Ridgely's Reserve. Too little, too late. The damage to the gunpowder is already done. The river has turned orange with the rain. I fear this will be the same with the Perryman Peninsula and the Bush River, the tidal estuary of the Chesapeake Bay. We will no longer be from the land of pleasant living. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Mary Lee Stritch, 3814 Federal Lane, Abingdon, Maryland. I'm here to urge the county council members to implement new zoning regulations that will prohibit warehouses over 250,000 square feet on properties with commercial, industrial, or light industrial zoning. The county council needs to do what it takes to protect Abingdon Woods, the Perryman Peninsula, and the rest of Harford County. At least 4 council members are needed to vote in favor of modifications to the zoning regulations so that there are clearly defined regulations on warehouse developments. County council members need to support the highest level of restrictions on mega warehouses and freight terminals without grandfathering in previous development applications. Neither Mega Million warehouses nor freight terminals should be allowed in CI or LI zones, which are intended for light or moderate use. There is absolutely nothing light or moderate about multi-million square feet warehouses. Freight terminals and warehouses of unrestricted size should only be permitted in districts intended for heavier impact. Commercial, industrial, and light industrial developments should not border residential areas. The zoning for Abingdon Woods was changed from residential to commercial industrial in 1982. At that point in time, Mr. Penman, a large warehouse was 25,000 square feet. Now they want multi-million square feet to go, and that's not fair if it was changed in 1982. Philadelphia Station, Abingdon Reserve, Pomeroy Manor, Autumn Run, and Medley Estates residential developments started to be approved in 1988. No prospective home buyers were informed that their homes, the biggest investment of their lives, would be adjacent to or in close proximity to commercial industrial properties. A moratorium on warehouse development has been put in place, and we've been very appreciative of that. However, the moratorium expires around October 19th. If the vote on Bill 230226 takes place on October 9th, and if it is approved by at least 4 council members, it won't go into effect for 60 days. That means there will be no moratorium in place. There will be a period of around 50 days when numerous permits could be applied for and possibly approved and grandfathered in. If the bill cannot take effect immediately, then at the very least, no permit should be approved until the bill is in effect. As I said, Bill 230226 needs at least 4 council members to vote in its favor. However, there are a few sections that do require clarification as the bill now reads. Number 1, definitions of warehouse, distribution center, and freight terminal are not clear. So perhaps terms could be replaced with possibly facilities like Mr. Bennett has suggested. There's
Ma'am,
no
please
sign-
bring your comments to a close.
Okay. And I just wanted to say that if they're fearful of non-conforming
Thank you, ma'am.
buildings,
Thank you.
then I bet they would be grandfathered in.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Gina Tillery, 1408 Skillman Court in Abingdon. I appreciate your work on this bill. I've read the proposed legislation and was confused by its content and intent and horrified by its potential realities. Absent was the definition of freight terminals and other facilities as they relate to the proposed zoning laws. These need to be clarified by amendment. The bill didn't appear to limit the size of freight facilities in residential neighborhood zone CI like those surrounding Abingdon Woods, which is exactly what we don't want. I could not find in its intent the desire to protect our forested lands by removing them from enterprise zoning and insisting that warehouse developers utilize areas where impervious surfaces already exist. This bill gave me insight into what living next to a freight terminal might look like. And after reading it, I envisioned a nonstop caravan of 18-wheelers careening up and down Philadelphia and Abington roads, and whatever road is plowed through the middle of Abington Woods. The constant beep of their warning mechanisms, the grinding of their engines, the rumble of their loads, all hours of the day and night, and of choking on the decarbonized fumes left behind once the trees are gone. Having these monstrosities looming and staring at me every day when I come home is the stuff of nightmares. That's why I'm here. I hope we can provoke you in the most positive way to consider amending the bill to include removing mature forest from the enterprise zones permanently by legislation, defining warehouse buildings by size, design, scope, and operations in more detail, removing freight terminals from CI zoned residential neighborhoods, limiting the size of facilities allowed in CI residential areas to less than 150 square feet, 150,000 square feet, and by adding as much distance as possible from these structures to residences by increasing berms in whatever manner that we need. And lastly, once we have a bill that clarifies and defines the buildings, their size, operations, and one that is free of all the possible loopholes, I'd like for you to please ensure that it is enacted as quickly as possible, perhaps in 30 rather than 60 days. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mark Keeley, followed by Tammy Wainwright, Robert Lynch, and Pamela Deemer.
Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Mark Keeley. My address is 7525 Connolly Drive, Hanover, Maryland, 21076. I'm here to speak in opposition to the bill 23-026. By trade, I am a traffic engineer. I've read the bill, and it's contrary to the existing zoning code. It also gives the appearance of spot zoning. It's reactionary to several projects in the county. The portion of the legislation regarding APFO is of particular concern to me, where it states that the developer would pay to the county the cost of a traffic study, where presumably the county would manage or conduct the traffic study. This appears to be legislation, attempt to solve a problem that doesn't exist, could create additional problems and grow the size of government. The potential problem, as I see it, would be the county's inability to provide oversight when it comes to reviewing traffic impact studies. The problems that could occur would be additional costs and, more importantly, additional time for a traffic study to be conducted, reviewed, and approved. Currently, the county has traffic impact guidelines that were recently done or updated in the last 2 years. The guidelines require a traffic scoping meeting that is held with the developer's traffic engineer, State Highway Administration, and the county. The guidelines outline how the traffic study is put together in terms of what intersections are conducted, when the intersections are counted. The county has control over growth rates, development, pipeline background developments that go into the traffic study. They control the growth rates, the analysis methodology, and ultimately the mitigation is approved by the county. The studies go through intensive review by the county and the State Highway. No less than 5 agencies within State Highway review the traffic impact studies. I believe that the county does an excellent job of reviewing traffic studies, just as they do with stormwater management plans. They are experts in the field of planning, engineering. They are your staff. And in my estimation, this type of legislation that requires an outside engineer to conduct the study was done in Annapolis and has failed for the very reasons that I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Tammy Wainwright, 11 Spasucia Road, Aberdeen. I support Bill 23-026 with the amendments suggested by 3P. This bill is a first step in achieving climate equity in Perryman and the county. For centuries, minorities, immigrants, and the poor have been forced to sit back and watch mostly male, mostly white, and mostly descendants of owner-operators of labor camps run by the enslaved make decisions on where they could live, work, educate, worship, and play. And for centuries, They have had their quality of life destroyed due to racist policies camouflaged as enterprise zones and economic development. Environmental racism is described as institutional rules, regulations, policies, or government and/or corporate decisions that deliberately target immigrant, poor, and minority communities for locally undesirable land uses. Communities which are already overburdened, underserved. This results in disproportionate exposure to unsafe drinking water, elevated air pollution, and health issues, of which I have, asthma and COPD. The environmental injustice that has been perpetrated upon our community is shameful. There is no excuse for the continual apathy and disregard for our well-being. According to Title IV of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we have the right to basic elements of a peaceful, pollutant-free existence, clean drinking water, and fresh air. There has been no economic benefit to our community. We have no sidewalks, no bus stops, shelters, and no open spaces for recreation. I implore you to think of the generations behind us. How will we ensure their quality of life? What will your legacy to the county and the community be? Please pass Bill 23-026. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening, Council President Vincenti, members of the council. My name is Robert Lynch. I'm a lawyer with the law firm Stark & Keenan, 20 Office Street, Bel Air, Maryland. I represent the Chesapeake Real Estate Group, which has been seeking development approval for the Mitchell property for over 2.5 years. Chesapeake has diligently pursued these approvals under the law and were within months of having preliminary plan approval when County Executive Gasly took office and without basis derailed my client's project. One lawsuit is currently pending in the Circuit Court against Harford County, and another will follow if this bill is signed into law. I'm speaking tonight in opposition to the bill. It's anti-business, an attack on Harford County's own economic development policy, which was set in motion 30 years ago. I never thought I'd be speaking before this supposedly pro-business Republican County Council, which has been asked by a Republican county executive to support a bill that directly tramples on constitutional protected property rights. Moratorium was passed, lots of debate, and there was a whole lot of things the county was supposed to do. Nothing has been done. I think Mr. Penman's examination made that very, very clear. They were to study warehouse impacts.
Folks, please. We're almost through this.
They were to study impacts on the Chesapeake Bay. They were supposed to look at existing infrastructure. Nothing was done. No studies conducted, no outreach to the stakeholders who are impacted. I've had the pleasure of working as a professional planner and lawyer in Harford County for over 45 years. Several of those years I served as planning director for Harford County back in the 1980s. It pains me to say that this bill before you tonight is the absolute worst zoning bill I've ever witnessed. It's a perfect example of sloppy draftsmanship and illustrates the lack of foresight of unintended consequences. What county council member in his or right mind would vote for a bill that makes almost every warehouse in Harford County a non-conforming use? Now, I understand the statement by Mr. Guthrie, it's going to be addressed. It's a very complicated issue to be addressed, and I believe it should be addressed. However, what else is in this bill? I think some other people indicated what kind of manufacturing, how extensive is manufacturing can occur in Perryman if this bill passes. And it could be over 1 million, 2 million square feet. Is that what the community expected? I'm not sure. This is a targeted bill. I don't care how you say it, how you mix it. This is a targeted bill against the Mitchell property. Goes way beyond a text amendment and effectively becomes a rezoning or downzoning of property. It radically transforms the adequate public facility law. It's going to cripple a project's ability to secure financing and get built. This bill violates the Harford County Master Plan, well-established legal concepts of uniformity, constitutes an illegal zoning action, and undermines the Harford County Planning Department's zoning integrity and statewide reputation. And for these reasons, this bill should be defeated. Thank you, President Vincenti.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Name and address, please, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Pamela Deemer, 928 Bergen Court, Bel Air, Maryland. I'm president of Harford County Climate Action. Bill 23026 limits warehouses to 250,000 square feet and does not permit freight terminals in commercial, industrial, and light industrial zones. These are both welcomed improvements to the zoning codes. We want the council to protect Abingdon Woods, Perryman Peninsula, and all of Harford County. So as the council considers amendments, we support heavy uses being only allowed in general industrial zones. They should not be bordering residential areas. We also support solar-ready rooftops like the Sierra Club does, and preserving forested wetlands, especially in the development envelope. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, ma'am.
Jackie Delisle, followed by Derek Christian, followed by Elizabeth Chamberlain, and Delaney Mizan.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Jackie Delisle, 4805 Philadelphia Road, Belcamp, Maryland, 21017. I'm here tonight to oppose Bill 23026 as introduced. We've heard tonight from many individuals who object to specific developments in specific areas of the county. New development. I'm here to represent to you the cause of those individuals who already own lots in Harford County that are already zoned CI, LI, or GI. People that own lots in existing industrial parks, such as Clayton Station, Riverside Business Park, Emerton Business Park. People who made investments in these lots years ago. For example, Clayton Station was created 24 years ago. It is an existing business park. Riverside West Business Park was created 19 years ago, an existing business park. Riverside East Business Park was created 17 years ago, an existing business park. Presently, many of the lots in these parks do not meet the 15-acre requirement, which is set forth in this bill. Property owners that have already made an investment, that are carrying mortgages, several property owners who have existing site plans already approved by the Department of Planning and Zoning will not be allowed to move forward with their investments. At the beginning of this evening, Mr. Bois indicated that one of the focuses of this development was on new development. I would suggest to you that it may address new development, but it does something much harsher to property owners who have already owned and have made an investment in Harford County. Property owners who pay taxes, who responsibly comply with their current zoning approvals or those that they have acquired. Mr. Grimm alluded to letters or zoning certificates. A zoning certificate is mandatory when anyone either buys a commercial piece of property, tries to refinance an existing piece of property, mortgages a property, attempts to lease it. If that zoning letter comes back and says either A, the proposed use is illegal under the zoning code, or it is non-conforming under the zoning code, the leasing agent has lost its lease. The property owner attempting to lease to a user has lost their proposed tenant. A property owner trying to refinance their existing mortgage that was perfectly legitimate when they bought their property, when they made the investment in Harford County, loses the ability to refinance that mortgage. New development should be guided by regulations. I'm not speaking to those this evening. I'm reminding you that this bill has a massive economic impact
on property owners who currently own lots in Harford County. It unilaterally removes a principal permitted use from those lots. It restricts the use of those lots in a very harsh manner to minimize. There is no, and this is almost unprecedented, there is no grandfathering to protect individuals who currently own these lots, existing business parks that are fully developed, have existing road networks, existing water and sewer, or have existing site plan approvals. I would urge this council to consider
Please bring your comments to a
grandfathering
close, ma'am.
for those uses, existing uses or existing approvals.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My name is Derek Christian. I'm a property owner of 101 Spastusha Road that's in Perryman. I came here today hoping to unveil the elephant in the room. And unfortunately, that elephant has already been exposed. It was bizarre to hear white people talk about the disjustice that are happening to a black community. Ultimately, my wife and I bought this home during the time of the Rite Aid shooting. And never did I think that this was going to ever affect me, that these warehouses would affect my life as it is today. We thought this would be our forever home. But truth of the matter is we have to reconsider it. I can't even sleep through the night. 3 o'clock in the morning hearing trucks. I take my trash out at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm almost getting hit by the warehouse workers speeding to work. I call for the police won't respond. We deserve the right of quiet enjoyment. I too represent an investor. However, my investors are a little different. You don't think that we have banks? You don't think that we have mortgages? But something's a little different. We spend probably on average 16 hours a day in our homes, okay? But what we won't get, my investors will not catch amnesia when it's time to change your quality of life. If you vote against us, I promise you that my investors will vote against the quality of life for you. We have the right to live in a household that's going to be affected, that we can pass on to generations on. Someone has to hear our cry. We have the right to live peacefully, not by trucks, not by millions of workers. I think this particular land has reached its top potential. Enough is enough. Remember, we will not have amnesia when it comes time to vote again. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Good evening, Elizabeth Chamberlain, 173 Glenview Terrace. And I'll echo on his investors spend our money here, by the way. I speak in favor of Bill 23-026 and thank the bill's champions. Properly worded, appropriately applied zoning does not injure property value or violate property rights. It safeguards the very quality of life that makes this area desirable. The quality of place that would attract investors who have the best interest of the citizens in mind. May I ask that, in addition to protecting the community's traffic and safety interests, can we please also protect our environment by preserving forests and wetlands, perhaps by amendments that have already been requested? Our representatives at the state level are currently working to stop the destruction of our environment and to reverse past destruction. During the last council meeting I attended, while Mr. Guthrie was telling us about the plan to build 6 new sports complexes, thank you. Did you know that Hartford County kids' football practice was canceled? Do you know why it was canceled? At 103 degrees, it was too hot for the kids to safely play outside. That's new. That did not used to happen. Our temperatures are climbing in Harford County. Our mean 12-month average has increased by 4 degrees over the past 100 years, according to the National Center for Environmental Information. This year was the driest year to date for the past 129 years, according to the National Drought Information System. Do you know why? Because we have mowed down the shade trees this land was naturally equipped with, and we replaced them with impervious surfaces, creating what ecologists call a heat island. As we pave over more of our earth, The trend will continue. This is not a problem for future generations, though it's that too because we are contributing to a downward spiral. It is a problem right now caused by the individuals who sat in those chairs before you and those before them. So if more impervious surfaces replace forests and land which could be reforested to build mega warehouses, apartment complexes, Walmarts, art auctions, even art complexes all over the place, after developers create more heat islands for profit all around where we are trying to live, don't bother building sports complexes. If children will not be able to play outside, they will be useless. Going forward, can we please count on you to incorporate into our decision-making process holistic understanding of how environmental changes impact health and life? Please ensure that those inform our zoning practices. Please continue to take appropriate actions to halt deforestation, responsibly manage stormwater runoff, the cumulative effects of impervious surfaces, exhaust fumes from combustion engines, and if you want to talk about manufacturing too, toxic waste from manufacturing. The safety of our drinking water, our children, and the health of the bay depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Delaney Mizan, 1812 Park Beach Drive. I'm going to echo the sentiment of the last speaker, us tree huggers. We keep setting these big goals to clean the Chesapeake Bay. We never make them. We continue to increase the amount of impervious surfaces in our watershed instead. And that's our issue, the land use. Chesapeake Bay watershed has a land-to-water ratio of 14:1, the largest in the world. What we do on land affects everything downstream, eventually leading back to the bay. The runoff prevents the growth of underwater grasses. With no underwater grasses, there's not enough oxygen for fish to survive. Increasing impervious surfaces in the watershed affects the entire ecosystem, which affects us. Environmental Science 101, everything is connected. Because of the runoff of sediment and harmful chemicals, dredging must occur for the boats to use the waterways, livelihoods are lost, tourism decreases, because who wants to look at orange and brown water with fish floating around belly up? You can prevent this now, before it is too late, when it matters, instead of slapping fines on developers that turn into the simple cost of doing business. You are in a unique position to be an example of what local legislation should look like across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We say we're saving the bay, yet we never reach our goals. We just pave. The problems are local with each town, county, and state. It is each of their land use across the entire watershed. The changes need to be local, and it starts here. Harford County can be the example of effective change, of finally considering the environment, bay, and community. Support Bill 2326 with 3 Ps amendments. It is bigger than Perryman. It is bigger than Harford County. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more speakers, Mr. President.
Really? Okay. With no more speakers, we'll conclude this public hearing, but I must say there's going to be a lot of work ahead of us over the next 7-8 days with working on amendments. Several council members are proposing amendments, as am I. We received 50 plus today from the administration, most of them just text amendments, but my council vice president's going to have to read every one of them in as we move through this. So there is a lot of work ahead of us, but we're up for the task. And remember, as I've always said, our job is to create legislation that's impactful across this county. And we know that we need to serve as many masters as possible. We're not going to satisfy any one individual, but we're going to do the best that we can to bring forward a product that protects property owners' rights, large and small, addresses many of the public safety issues, the infrastructure issues, the traffic issues, to the best of our ability. And this will conclude this public hearing tonight. Thank you.
I'm going back and cooking 5,000 sausages.
We're going to take a short recess before we start the next one. Thank you. Chair calls to order public hearing for Bill 23-027, Apartments B3 General Business District. Mr. Grimm, Mr. Boyd, Mr. Richardson, welcome again. If you guys want to go ahead and start, we're ready.
Mr. President, what we'll do is we'll follow the process as last time. I want to
They don't trust me much with electronic stuff. We'll follow the process as we did last time. I want to introduce Ms. Bourgeois, Dubois. I'm sorry, already been a long night. We'll give opening remarks, a brief description of the bill, and then Mr. Grimm is here to answer any technical questions you may have.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm back up. So this bill, 23-027, it also amends Section 267 of the Harford County Code. It removes apartments from the B3 General Business District. The purpose of B3 is to provide a wide range of retail services and businesses to serve the local and countywide community, generally on arterial roads. These types of businesses drive the economy of Harford County by providing the sale of goods and services, providing convenience, reducing traffic, and creating unique job opportunities. Currently, we have about 188 acres of undeveloped B3 zoned properties that are developable. Environmental factors, however, make some of those properties undevelopable. In the last 15 years, Harford County has developed 1,700 apartments in the county. By allowing apartments in B3, it creates certain infrastructure issues. Typically, there are no sidewalks on arterial roads outside of shopping centers. This presents a safety issue as more individuals try to cross major intersections without crosswalks or walk along the shoulder of major roadways. Not all B3 properties are on county bus routes, which may require expansion of the bus system if high-density housing is built in these underserved areas. The redevelopment of B3 zoned parcels in the future for residential uses cannot be determined. Therefore, the impact to school enrollment projections cannot be determined. In other words, a B3 property could be used for a convenience store or a car wash, or it could provide hundreds of units of housing. Planners cannot effectively plan for those two extremes. This bill does, however, allow for apartments as part of a mixed-use project. That's all I have.
Mr. Grimm, do you have anything to add?
I don't have anything to add at this time, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I believe all of us are of the understanding that there are areas where apartments are a good fit, and there are absolutely areas where they're not. And I think that's why we're sitting here tonight. And with that, Mr. Penman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you're exactly right. There is a place for apartments in some areas of the county. And that's kind of what, I'm hoping just to kind of understand and figure out what that right level is, what that right percentage is. But, Mr. Grimm, are you able to kind of compare and contrast the 2311 bill versus this 2327 bill with the difference of those bills?
I apologize. I was assuming the 2311 bill was the bill that was introduced
Yes.
earlier in the year.
Yeah, prior to the summer break.
Yes. The main change is that in the original bill, mid-rise apartments were not listed in there as to be removed from the B3 district. So that was an error. It should have included garden, mid-rise, and high-rise apartments. So that's predominantly the main change.
So if that would have passed, mid-rise apartments would have still been permitted in B3. Okay. And as you alluded to, there is still, through mixed use apartment is still permitted in B3, which if we remove apartments from B3 outside of mixed use, it would only authorize it in R4 and R3. Is that correct?
R4, under the special development standards.
Okay. Do we know how much R4 is undeveloped to permit that?
I have that number. I apologize. I don't have it since I'm specifically talking about B3 tonight. I don't have that in my head, but I do have that information in my office, and I can provide that to you.
Okay. And the last is just kind of a comment. I know this isn't pertaining to one piece of property, but the 315, 317 Mountain Road work group, I think, has been successful. Based off of that work group and the subject matter experts and the community input, we were able to reduce that footprint with the developer from 100 to 48 apartments, and those 48 apartments will be marketed initially exclusively to 55 and above. I think they call that active adults or senior living. So I look forward to that continued conversation, and I thank you all for being here.
Anyone else, council? Mr. Giangiordano?
So thank you, Mr. Grimm, again. What is the actual square footage that you will need for mixed use, and how much in a mixed-use development will have to be commercial, and is it split up into, what type of commercials it's split up into in a mixed-use development?
Well, the intent of mixed use is to bring many different uses under one project or one building, and to integrate those uses to provide walkability and for people that want to live where they work and things like that, or people that may be empty nesters that don't want to have a car or rely on a car all the time. That's really true mixed use. And our zoning code allows for mixed use. And the way it looks at it, it gives a chart. And I don't have all those percentages with me right now, but that chart specifies residential uses can be X percentage, retail uses can be X percentage, service uses can be X percentage. And it just goes down the line as to what percentage of a project can be dedicated to any one specific use.
And all this in a property B3 zone that property B3 zone can develop the apartments. Is there a limit on the height, and what's a mixed use and what's mid-rise and what's high-rise?
So garden apartments are up to 3 stories, and mid-rise are 4 to 5, and then high-rise are 6. The zoning code specifies that the maximum height of a high-rise can be 6 stories.
Do we have any 6-story apartment complexes in Harford County?
Yes, and I specifically it's in a municipality. I know in Harford Grace we have them, but yes.
Okay. My second question is, the prior bill, there was an amendment that was put in for a 50,000 square foot retail center next to a B3 to allow that to become a mixed use. How many of those properties would meet that requirement where there's a retail center, 50,000 square feet or more next to a open B3 area that they could build? Do you know that?
Yeah, that would take some significant analysis of the development envelope, zoning designations, and shopping centers, so that's not an easily attainable figure. It takes some analysis.
Okay. So moving forward, if we approve this B3 mixed use, then that property itself just has to be mixed use B3 as long as there's no other amendments that are put in to change that, correct?
Right. It would have to meet the mixed-use requirements under the special development standards, and I can provide you those requirements under the B3 for mixed-use centers.
Okay. One of the other issues I've heard from talking to some people is that the building construction, which wouldn't go under you, which go under somebody else, but the amount of fires that comes up next to a building because of the material that's built, and that might have to be something else that's looked at into that. And I know you're not specialty on that. And I think that's the only other questions I have right now. I might have another one in a minute or two. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Bennett?
Hello, thank you again. I thought we had a really good conversation about this at the last hearing for the previous bill. I learned a lot from that. But, I just wanted to state again that, if you don't own a car, to live in one of these apartments that is not in a residential area can be harmful to your health and harmful to your safety and just getting to what you need. These B3 zoned areas are not set up necessarily for you to get to what you need, which was spoken to in your comments. But also in designating B3 for mixed use only, that would significantly impact the potential number of apartments in those developments if there was to be an apartment in B3. Is that correct?
Could you state your question in it?
So same amount of land in a B3 property. If you were to allow garden apartments versus only allowing mixed-use apartments, by only allowing mixed use, you're limiting the total amount of apartments that could possibly fit on that land because there would need to be so much space used for business operations on that property.
Correct. The percentages in the zoning code specify how much of that can be residential.
So, you know, from that perspective, it could be argued that not only does it create a higher quality of life for residents who come into those mixed-use apartments, but it also lowers the level of impact on the surrounding community as far as infrastructure impact on schools, parks and rec, roads, and so on. And from a walkability perspective, we talked about this in the last hearing, the closer people are to what they need, the less they're using our roads, and the less we are spending per resident on their just daily upkeep to get to what they need. So from that perspective, we can make new residents of Harford County who are positive on a tax revenue basis instead of a net negative. So I just wanted to bring back some of those points of comment that we had just a few months ago.
Anyone else? Seeing none, Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up, or she's not here? She slipped out on us.
Yes,
We're
Mr.
done.
President, we have 18, I think.
We have 18?
Yes.
Can you call your first speaker?
Kate Perbilinski, followed by Beth Pajoli.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Kate Perbilski. I live at 2217 Edinburgh Drive in Fallston. I am in support of Bill 23027 as it stands today, as well as the bill for Perryman Peninsula. These bills will benefit all the citizens of Harford County as they will slow growth so we can take a breath and reassess the needs and the direction of the county. Overdevelopment is happening super fast. Huge apartment complexes are rising all over the county without thinking about infrastructure, traffic, schools, or the safety of the citizens living nearby or in the complexes themselves. One of my main concerns is traffic, and I think we can all agree that traffic is a big problem in the county right now. Adding large apartment complexes or warehouses to areas that already have numerous accidents is simply irresponsible. We need to slow down the growth, and these bills help to do that. I don't want to take up too much time because we've been here a long time. I think we probably should have had 2 nights for the bills because the Boston people had to wait around a long time. But anyway, I wanted to say I would ask each of the council members to vote for Bill 23027. I'm sure you know by the turnout tonight, as well as other meetings, that this is the will of the people of Harford County. If you do not vote for these bills, then it's obvious you have a different agenda than serving the people who elected you. Remember, you are supposed to represent us, the people of Harford County, and I respectfully ask you to vote for the will of the taxpaying citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Hello, my name is Beth Pajoli, and I'm at 2740 Green Road. Thank you, Council President Vincenti, for introducing this bill on behalf of the County Executive. I support Bill 23027 and respectfully request that you, the Council, vote yes to the bill as is. I've attended and participated in many public hearings for legislation, and the first question always asked is this a good bill for the majority of Harford County citizens? My response is overwhelmingly yes, this is a good bill. Bill 23027 is common sense, and it corrects an error in the code. The zoning code states on page 179 that B3 is business services, to provide sufficient and convenient locations for business uses that serve the needs of local neighborhoods and communities and the traveling public. It does not state apartments. It also does not state that apartment development suggests a need for sufficient roads, sidewalks, school capacity, and emergency services. Our county can't accommodate the influx of more intense development in areas where there is not sufficient infrastructure, especially along the edges of the development envelope. Passing Bill 23027 is a step in the right direction to managing residential growth. This bill makes sense, and I ask you to vote yes. And Council, let me be very clear. Marketing to 55 and up is not binding. It's self-imposed, and marketing is just that. It's a wish. It's a hope. It's not legally binding. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Kate Ganano, followed by Isaac Ambruso.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Name
So
and
it's
address,
very
please.
awkward back here. I think it's done on purpose. All right, my name is Katie Ganano. I live at 2320 Franklin's Chance Court, Fallston, Maryland, 21047. Oh, it already started. Okay. Good evening, County Council, Fallston, Perryman, what's left of them over here, Abingdon, everyone here, well, outside before, I guess, emailing, calling, and uniting for deeper issues than the three bills on the table this evening. We, the people, are tired of being misled, misrepresented, and apparently misunderstood. So hear me now loud and clear. We want the right not only to speak, but also to be heard. In fact, it's our constitutional right. We want politicians who care more about people than money and power. So we say no to overdevelopment. Just to be clear, I am not anti-development, but this is this is not responsible development. I'm just leave it at that. Our Harford County infrastructures are stressed. Safety should be a top priority. Overall, having B3 mixed-use zoning will do more harm than good, at least for my family and community. I know this part is specific to Fallston, but please let me know where I can find a parking garage in Fallston. How is that harmonious with surroundings? I am extremely concerned about our already crowded roadways in Harford County as a whole, with little to no room to expand on roads such as Mountain Road 23 and 24. Safety of B3 mixed-use zoning in areas which are not really walkable, which has been brought up. Worry about the future. Environmental impacts, including runoff, water contamination, more detriment to the Chesapeake Bay, not only from a conservational standpoint, but also the livelihood of fishermen, seafood, including our unique blue crabs, restaurants, and potential negative impact on tourism along the Chesapeake Bay. As stated in prior meetings, I'm very troubled by Harford County school overcrowding. 2 of my 3 children currently attend Youth Benefit Elementary School, which all of you know by now is at 104% capacity and continues to rise past projections year after year, along with other Harford County public schools. What will be done to address this very real and very time-sensitive issue? When? We are tearing apart neighborhoods and children from structure and normalcy in an effort for claims of progress. These are the same children, my 3 little ones included, who have been through enough change and confusion during the COVID-19 pandemic. Why compound problems for our children by zoning and adding special exceptions for more kids to possibly be redistricted because we've had too much development too quickly? Additionally, there has been chatter about 9 townhomes being built at 317 Mountain Road. However, after clarification per Harford County zoning, townhomes are not permitted in B3 except for in Chesapeake Science Security Corridor, which the property is not located in. I would like you to vote yes to Bill 23-027 without amendments and yes to 23026 for the future of our beautiful county as it is in your hands. Please take the next right step of integrity for the people you represent. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, ma'am. Call your next speaker.
Isaac Ambruso.
Call your next
Stephanie
speaker.
Flash, followed by Beth Skier.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address.
Stephanie Flash. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Harford, 1902 Norwood Court, Fallston. Friends of Harford supports removing the residential development from the B3 General Business District. Business Districts 1, 2, and 3 provide goods and services to those who live in neighborhoods and communities that were developed within residential districts. The analysis by the Department of Planning and Zoning identified the rapidly developing development envelope and the limited inventory of B3 that remains to support the business community. The use of B3 for residential development creates community hardship and hinders planning that ensures our public schools, roads, sewers, public safety, and other infrastructure are adequate to support proposed high-density residential development. The use of apartments in B3 zoning as an action plan for the workforce housing is problematic. for analyzing and planning suitable areas for housing in our county. And I just want to mention tonight, if we're speaking about supporting our business communities, in which a lot of the organizations came out prior for the public hearing, maybe we should focus on those business services being applied to those business communities. So please vote to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good
Name and
evening.
address?
Beth Shear, 2814 Cross Country Court, Boston. Some years ago, myself and many other local residents were in the midst of working very hard to have our local elementary school replaced. I recall specifically speaking at the Board of Education meeting about the efficacy of spending $4 million plus of state funds on air conditioning installation in a school that had lead in the water and as a result boarded up water fountains, asbestos in multiple areas, buckets and trash cans in the hallways collecting rainwater that leaked through the roof, and children sitting on the floor taking tests on clipboards because of a lack of space. I asked that $4 million plus go to construction of a new school instead of adding air conditioning to a failing old one. The baffling reply at that time was that if we don't spend the money on air conditioning from the state, we will lose it. The air conditioning was then installed in a school building that was torn down approximately 2 to 3 years later for replacement. The $4 million worth of air conditioning was torn down with it. That is the ultimate in waste and a very poor long-term plan and spending. That air conditioning cost the citizens of Maryland more than $1 million a year. The replacement school was built to the same capacity as the original, including the addition of space for pre-K. It could not be bigger to operate efficiently, as it was the largest school in Harford County and one of the largest in the state. The county was aware well of this, yet the most recent master plan at the time expanded the area of high-density development into the area around the school that was being built. The community vehemently spoke out about that plan, as well as the increase in B3 zoning proposed in the area and what it would do to the community school. To add insult to injury, a residential use was added to that business use, B3. The data for school capacity was not updated to include this use to calculate potential enrollment impacts. It's hard to believe that after a $34 million plus replacement school was built, here we are again. Full circle. Since the school was proposed and built, more than 265 single-family homes and more than 348 apartments have been added to that school's community. Also, there is still vacant residential, RR, residentially zoned property in that pipeline. The school, among others, is full again and using space not designed for classrooms to teach the community's children. It has only been open for 6 years. This is not the only school bursting at the seams. Please, let's not repeat these errors in other rural areas of the county. There is an issue with your long-term planning and forecasting model and an issue with planning for growth if you cannot get more than 6 years out of a major school replacement. Piecemeal is not the way to go. We need correction from the ground up, corrections based on past inaccuracies. Outdated language and definitions in the zoning code need to be addressed. If you're going to allow exceptions, you must be prepared to provide the staff and funds to monitor and manage those exceptions. Start by voting for this current proposed change to B3 to correct this one inaccuracy for now. The community is asking you again to use all of the data you have access to for planning and for growth, both commercial and residential. If you make a change, you will need to make all
Please
of
bring
the
your
additional-
comments to a close, ma'am.
all the additional adjustments necessary that go along with the change. Keep
Thank
the
you,
big
ma'am.
picture in mind at all times.
Thank you.
Marissa Manley, followed by James O'Brien.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Marissa Manley, 2802 Forest Glen Drive in Baldwin. I'm here to speak in favor of Bill 23027. I urge all of you, including my representative Aaron Penman, to vote yes to this bill with no amendments. My fellow community members have expressed concerns about traffic, which I agree with, have expressed concerns about school overcrowding, which I absolutely agree with. I don't want my middle child to start kindergarten in a converted planning room with no windows and no bathroom. Nor do I want my 3 children redistricted out of Fallston schools, in which we've built a community through our school and rec council involvement. And with 188 acres of undeveloped B3 land in Harford County, allowing B3 zoning as sites to build apartments could have a tremendous impact on those traffic and school overcrowding concerns. I have some firsthand experience with school overcrowding due to the increase in development and increase in community population. I am a teacher at Perry Hall High School. As I've attended council meetings and community input meetings, I've heard several citizens express that they moved to Harford County to escape the overdevelopment and overpopulation of Perry Hall. Perry Hall's population in 1980 was 13,455. By 1990, they grew to 22,723. The 2020 census for Perry Hall was 29,409. By comparison, Fallston in 2020 census had a population of 9,118. In the late 90s and early 2000s, when I attended Fallston High School, Perry Hall High School had a very comparable student body demographic. Perry Hall was overpopulated in those late 90s, and so an addition was built in 1997 to alleviate the need for portable classrooms. By 2003, and then again in 2005, more additions were needed and built. Despite those additions, we still have 5 portable classrooms at Perry Hall High today. Our school capacity is 1,971 students, and we have 2,200. As the number of apartments and rental homes has increased in Perry Hall, it's impacted and changed school demographics. I don't want to see that same change happen to our Harford County public schools. Our students that were identified as economically disadvantaged at Perry Hall, in 2018 to 2019, there were 280 students identified. In the 2022 to 2023 school year, there were 523 students identified, and our enrollment in free and reduced lunch has grown to 922 students, which is about 48% of our student population. To be clear, I'm not opposed to residential zoning areas having apartments, but I am opposed to apartments in B3 where the zoning does not allow to count for that residential amount going in. As other people have talked about sidewalks and walkability, I do want to bring up the fact that in Perry Hall there are the safety features of the walkways and the do not walk and walk indicators. We don't see that in Harford County. And as a result, we have had pedestrians struck in recent years in our roadways. So on Harford Fire Blog, there was a pedestrian struck in 2021 at Aberdeen and Route 40. And on May 5th, 2022, an adult and child were struck in the roadway at Maryland 24 and Edgewood Road. I want you to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address.
Yes, James O'Brien, 1735 Shakespeare Drive, Delaware, Maryland. Wanted to thank the council president and the honorable council people for listening to our supplications here. I'm a over 40-year resident in Harford County. I want to state at the outset, I'm not against property rights. As a matter of fact, I'm a supporter of them. Like all rights that people have, this isn't the Wild West. You need a government, you need the laws, you need the administration to make it cohesive, make it work for everybody. So it's a, it's a synergy. I'm for the bill 23027, and I thank the county executive for putting it forth. And they talk about this moratorium, and then things are changing. Well, when you come into a new office and you hear and maybe learn of a planning and zoning process that has been broken for years, then the first thing you do, if, as was stated, you want to do the right thing, which everybody up there wants to do, you go, oh, wait a minute, let's stop everything, let me study it. And as you do that, you'll learn things from different people, and then new information will come in, so you have to change. That's just a human thing, and that's what County Executive Casilli has faced here. It's clear that B3 isn't something for retail, isn't something for apartments or residential, but it's for reasonable retail. This is a result of old comprehensive rezoning, so this will help correct that. In the process of planning and zoning, there are three basic groups. The development group, which the owners want to maximize their value. The development companies, construction, et cetera, they just make money on what they're told to do. And the legal representation that do the lobbying, whose job is to zealously represent the client. The client wants to get the most money out of that property, and that's what they have to represent, regardless of what they think. So, but that's not always in the best interest of the surrounding community. There's the government agencies. Traditionally, planning and zoning has been not the best friend of the regular public. The development people are in there all the time. The lawyers are in there all the time. They're, it's hail fellow one met. They help support, the campaigns, which is right to do. I mean, that's fine, of the people. So they have access. With access comes influence, but the public doesn't have that. The public, they find out, if they're lucky, something's about to change, and it's big, and it's going to hurt them. So they don't know the laws. They go into the planning and zoning, and I can attest to give many examples that are not treated as friends, as they should be. There's wait for the legal counsel to get it. Oh, you have to do a FOIA request for something that's public record, and you're a member of the public, and it's accessible. That's gone on for a long time.
Jim, please bring your comments to a close.
Oh, well, my last thing is, go at the crossroads at Hickory and look at what's there.
Thank you,
And
Jim.
there's my argument why this has to pass.
Thank you.
Deborah Schreiber, followed by Fred Serkis.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Excuse me, Debbie Schreiber, 1114 Stromco Drive. Thank you, council members and council president Patrick Vincente for allowing us to speak. I've crossed a lot of things off because a lot of people have already said them, and we've been here long enough. So I do support Bill 230-27 with no amendments. And Mr. Grimm, I'm sorry if I quote this wrong, but going back on May 16th, you stated that the B3 has approximately 305 acres. I hear it was 188 now, remaining that we need to preserve and maintain these properties for economic development. Most B3 acres have significant challenges as crossroads that are not crossable and non-walkable. We have neither the infrastructure, school capacity, or EMS and hospitals that can maintain these overdevelopment in all of Harford County, not just my hometown of Fallston. And I'd like to also mention that I'm definitely not anti-business. That's fine. We all need businesses, and it belongs in certain areas. And I am also in support of Bill 23026. We have a little bit too many warehouses in Harford County. And I wanted to thank County Executive Bob Casserly for bringing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Fred Serkis, 1114 Stromco Drive in Fallston. Good evening, Council President Vincente and all council members. I support Bill 23027 with no amendments. I ask that all county council representatives vote yes for this bill. I also support Bills 23026 and 23028 regarding warehouses and term limits. A lot has been said about the effect with apartments on crime, the environment, infrastructure, schools. As a physician, I was just going to focus on a couple of medical issues. I'm concerned about Harford County only having one hospital when Harford Memorial closes. It's projected to close, I think, by the end of this year or early spring of next year. When that happens, there will be a lack of hospital beds for new admissions, and wait times in the ER will increase more than what they are now. So currently, according to hospitalstats.org, Upper Chesapeake is now rated as only an average hospital. I'm concerned that if they're apartments, then the quality of care will go down because there'll be so many more people, and the wait times in the ER will go up. The latest figures that I saw was right now, if someone's admitted to the hospital at Upper Chesapeake, the average time to get admitted and get to a room is now 4 hours and eight minutes. So that's only going to get worse, which could obviously affect the quality of care. According to Medicare.gov, Hospital Compare, Upper Chesapeake is actually a 2-star rating hospital out of 5. The overall star rating for hospitals summarizes quality information on important topics like readmissions and deaths after major illnesses such as heart attacks, pneumonia. They concentrate on the 5 quality care indicators are mortality, safety of care, readmissions, patient experience, and timely and effective care. Currently, according to Medicare.gov, they also rate nursing homes too. Upper Chesapeake is a 2-star rating out of 5. Patient survey rating is a 3 out of 5. So I am concerned, especially since Harford Memorial right now has 82 beds. Upper Chesapeake, the new hospital, is slated to have 72 beds, so we're losing 10 beds. So I'm really afraid all this is going to drain the EMS services, and it's all going to affect the quality of care. Right now, I've been checking with MIMS, which is a Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services. Upper Chesapeake has been on red alert since midnight tonight. So that's like 20 hours right now they've been on red alert, which means no cardiac beds. So
Thank you, sir.
that's pretty dangerous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Verna White, followed by Lauren Heiser.
Ms. Heiser? Yeah. Good evening, ma'am.
Hi, Lauren Heiser, 2087 Stewart Drive in Fallston. I'm here to support Bill 23-027. Apartments have a more substantial effect on public facilities such as schools, fire, and EMS than typical business uses. In order to have accurate planning and forecasting, they should not be included in B3. I actually feel that all residential uses should be removed from B3 zoning. But as apartments are the highest density use currently in B3, I support this bill as the first step to needed change. The B1, B2, and B3 districts are intended to provide sufficient and convenient locations for business uses that serve the needs of local neighborhoods and communities and the traveling public. B3, General Business District, is intended to provide a wide range of retail, service, and business uses serving local and county-wide areas, not residential. B3 zoning should be limited to business purposes per the description, and I feel that apartments require additional review and consideration beyond what's required in B3 zoning. The council should require additional special development restrictions to high-rise, mid-rise, and garden apartments in residential zoning to include sidewalks, adequate school capacity, or approve plans for new school construction that will provide adequate capacity, and that adequate capacity should be there prior to use and occupancy permits being issued. Walkable resources, food shopping, increased open space, and recreation requirements and public safety plans. Any approved apartment should be in line with surrounding architecture, including the number of stories. Like I said, this bill is a good first step to right the ship, so to speak, in this county. Thank you for your consideration. I want to also thank Mr. Grimm, who's patiently answered many of my questions over the last few weeks so that I can be informed and help to inform others. I'm very new to all of this, but what still confuses me is that if the vast majority of your district is informed and very united in support of something, like this bill, we should assume that we have your vote. Otherwise, I have to assume that you think that you either know better that your opinion's more important, or that you're representing someone else's interest. I hope that we have your support.
Thank you, ma'am.
Aaron Deneen, followed by Josh Kozel.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Hi there, Erin Deneen, 519 Arama Drive. As a resident of Harford County, I'm speaking in support of Bill 23027. I'm speaking to you tonight to ask for your support and vote yes to this bill as is. I support this legislation for many reasons. One in particular is that countywide school enrollment forecasting does not and has not accounted for residential housing and business zoning, also known as B3. There are over 188 acres, which might be up for debate, not quite sure, of undeveloped B3 land in Harford County. Current zoning code allows 100 units per 5 acres for mid-rise apartments. I think we can probably do that math. And this legislation is needed to protect our schools. The Benson apartments, not too far down the road, for example, have added 25 students to our schools, which is much more than what they were expected to yield. You have a chance to make a positive difference to Harford County by preserving this land use for what it was originally meant for, which is business use. Please do the right thing, and I ask for all of you to please vote yes to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Name and address?
All right. My name is Josh Kozel, 1106 Emerald Drive, 21047. I'm here tonight. I support Bill 23-027. And Mr. Penman, you're wrong. The community does not support the adjusted 48 apartments that you and your buddy are trying to plan. Currently, apartments are allowed in the B3 zone through a special development approval by the Director of Planning and Zoning. But in reading the definition, B3, General Business District, is intended to provide a wide range of retail service and business uses serving local and county-wide areas. Such activities are generally located along the arterial roads. This district is intended for industrial, office, and business uses of a moderate scale and intensity. Apartments do not belong. It's simple as that. We need to continue to remove the loopholes that are allowing the county to drastically overdevelop. Throughout the entire county, our schools are overcrowded. Bel Air Elementary, Youth Benefit, Havity Grace, and Red Pump, just to name a few. Roads are overcrowded with traffic and accidents, as they are already falling apart and cannot handle any more additions. This includes, but not limited to, Route 152, 1, 543, 22, 136, 23, and the list goes on and on. Hospital beds are falling in overall totals, but we are to believe that they can handle the huge influx of people the apartments and high-density housings will bring. The environment is a second thought and being destroyed at the hands of developers and for the future generations to suffer. Fire and EMS resources are being exhausted, and they too have concerns about the design and functionality of the apartments coming to Harford County. This is leading to an unharmonious design of the county. For instance, a garage below apartments like in Fallston. Looking at the zoning code, section 267-74, section C, development standards, subsection 3, design. The proposed project shall be designed with buildings which are compatible and harmonious with surrounding uses. How are these buildings harmonious? Especially with the mentioned the parking garage underneath the apartment in Fallston. I want to bring this up specifically because both fire and EMS have gone on record saying that they have major concerns with having a fire suppression system, especially with the electronic vehicles inside of those apartments, or inside those parking garages. This bill is absolutely needed, and I believe more is needed too. Past administrations have rubber-stamped too many projects and placed this county in a strained state. Using the warehouse moratorium as an example, further action is needed, and the overdevelopment in high-density housing has become a problem in this entire county. In the warehouse moratorium, it says a 90-day moratorium on the issuance of any approvals or permits for any development of any warehouses in Harford County so that the county or Harford County government can study and reconsider its zoning and development regulations with respect to such facilities. Let's replace warehouse with high-density housing, garden apartments, mid-rise apartments, high-rise apartments, and mixed-use properties. What is being proposed around the county is not affordable and just large projects lining the pockets of developers and politicians. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Ed Hubner, followed by Matt Chandler.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just pretend to have a podium here.
Yes, sir.
Put my papers on.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ed Hubner, 508 Stratford Road in Falston. I'm here to talk in favor of 23027. Some of my comments have changed since I sat through the other long debate. I've heard the term property rights, and I understand that. I also heard the zoning changes amounting to illegal taking of property without proper compensation. I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, but I invite you to look at Ambler Realty versus the City of Euclid, which is a Supreme Court decision in 1926, which still holds, that says zoning is an extension of the community's policing authority. Community health, safety, and welfare trumps property rights. In this case here of Euclid versus Ambler, Ambler got rezoned from industrial to residential and sued for the loss of property value that the zoning changes made. They lost, all right? So when you hear these conversations about loss of value and things like that, there's already Supreme Court rulings that say that's really not a valid argument. I do support this bill. I understand the importance of mixed-use development, which coincidentally came out of what became Euclid zoning, which became a problem, which led to the sprawl. So I understand trying to move things close together so people don't have to get into the car to get a gallon of milk. But just because I own a Piggly Wiggly doesn't mean I can put an apartment next to it and put a sidewalk in between and call it mixed use. I mean, the idea is, you know, if we're on page 1, you know, line 19, mixed uses that have a synergy of uses, design, efficiency of design, and reduction of vehicle miles traveled. I mean, we're talking about a development that is designed from the beginning, ground up, not little piecemeals. I have a B3 here, and I have a Royal Farms, and I want to make it something else. And going through here also, what really struck me is on page 3, lines 11 through 14, where they talk about if I have a B3 in a district that has been enveloped by the development envelope, all of a sudden I can develop it as B4. To me, this sounds like stealth upzoning. I don't know how this got in here, but whoever put it in should be ashamed, right? If I have B3 and I want to develop it as B4, I should have to come in and make, you know, get the zoning change. So I encourage all to vote for this bill without amendment. If you feel that you can't, I encourage you to then vote no. Don't kill this bill through amendment or abstention. I think we all deserve to see where you stand on a bill like this. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for convening this meeting.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Name and address.
Good evening. Matt Chandler, 841 Ripple Stream Court, Joppa, Maryland, 21085. I don't have a fancy suit. I live in Harford County, and I stated my complete address, so I'm not a developer. I want to read 5 lines to you. Provide for an enriched and enhanced natural environment by the preservation of trees. Encourage orderly and staged development. Buildings which are compatible and harmonious with surrounding areas and minimize impact. Consider the existing natural features, bicycles, pedestrians, and vehicle traffic, and protect the residential character of the surrounding neighborhoods. These are statements that are required by the Harford County Zoning Code, for which this bill references. I have no idea how hundreds of apartments can fit in this criteria. I have no idea how multi-story mid and high-rise, high-density apartments could possibly fit into this criteria. This says nothing about the impacts to traffic, our schools, and our environment. 4 days ago, as others mentioned, there was an article in the news about a massive die-off in the Chesapeake Bay as a result of high-density development in our backyards, in Joppa, just a few miles near our homes in Fallston? Where's the preservation of the trees and the environment that was required? Most of our schools are already at a breaking point. When we add hundreds of high-density apartments, how is this orderly and staged? Most of our roads, where many of these B3 locations are located, are already overburdened. How is this compatible with the stated zoning goals, as I mentioned earlier? Even with this passage, my understanding based on zoning 267-7062 is that 75% of the use in B3 can still be residential. For example, a 5.21 acre parcel would still allow 75 apartments instead of 100. I still ask that the council members pass this bill and look for further enhancements. In response to Mr. Penman's comment about 315, my understanding is the developer only agreed to senior housing for the first 730 days. And nothing is binding for the apartment count that the developer has already changed his mind on for other properties that adversely impact our quality of life. Mr. Penman asked about the percentages of residential and B3 and mixed. I do have that. This is from the zoning code. Residential 75%, service uses 75%, retail trade 50, institutional 50, and I have the rest of them here as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And the last speaker this evening is Linda Ziskin.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address?
Good evening. My name is Linda Ziskin, and I live at 2502 Thames Court, Fallston. I said I didn't want to go first, but I didn't mean I wanted to go last. Okay. Residents in Harford County have
Mila.
been plagued by uncontrolled development and sprawl for decades. No offense to you all sitting up there, but it's amazing to me that council members would be given the authority to vote on bills that could destroy such a beautiful place as Harford County. When I think about the expertise one would have to undertake such a monumental task with all the nuances, especially that I've been hearing lately, even tonight, of such a diverse county. Not to mention, you all don't even work a full-time job. I mean, your job needs to be full-day work. It's part-time, right? Let us...
You don't want me to respond to that, but go ahead.
Well, I know we have an educator and a police officer, so I don't, Let us, the community of Fallston, help you in this important work. For starters, vote yes to Bill 23027. As council members, you have been schooled, as I have over the past few weeks, by some very intelligent super sleuths and community members on hospital, singular, roads, schools, and first responders' capacity to effectively support our community along with environmental concerns. These considerations that you've been hearing could be utilized in other areas of the county as well. Developers can be very determined to make the almighty dollar. It will be your duty to be more determined to protect the citizens you represent. For starters, vote yes to Bill 23027. Fallston residents have been fighting tooth and nail for our community. We are homeowners. We are vested in our community. Apartment dwellers, not so much. Developers have no such vestment in our community. They have an investment, but not vested. As county council members, you need to have the stewardship of Harford County at the forefront of all your decisions regarding development. The Fallston community does. Join us and do the right thing for not only Fallston, but the entire county. Vote yes to Bill 23027. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, ma'am. Last speaker. So with no other speakers, this will conclude this public hearing for Bill 23-027. This bill is not as timely as the warehouse bill, so it gives us more time to consider amendments, if any, for this bill. So you'll hear from us very soon. Thank you. Chair calls to order public hearing for Bill 23-028, charter amendment term limits. Mr. Jan Giordano, if you'd like to start out, please.
Sure. This is a charter amendment for term limits. Bill 23-28 represents a compromise between two original bills, one that was introduced and one that was not introduced. The first one that was not introduced was back in February. The second one was introduced, and we tried to introduce amendments. The amendment was that it was a 3-year term based on their original bills of 3 years with the order for succession, meaning that somebody could sit off the council for a minimum of 1 term, and whether they ran again to try to get reelected, whether it was 4 years, 8 years, or 20 years down the road, they can do that. Dion, as an example, was off for a while, but that's for anybody. I mean, there is really pretty much term limits. Every 4 years, you can vote somebody on, somebody off. As the P3 people that were in here before, they said, hey, they didn't want Curtis. They voted Curtis off, and Jacob is on. So Rob Wagner was also on. They voted Rob off, and Jessica's on. So, we tried working with them, trying to put that through before. They withdrew both bills, so this bill is now going to go to the public, and this is what it represents. So thank you, County Council.
Thank you. Council, anyone else? Mr. Penman?
I want to first just say I'm excited for the conversation that we're having about term limits. This time last year, I don't think it was a conversation at all. I think fundamentally, myself and some colleague members disagree on the nature of the number of terms, but it's still encouraging to have that conversation. Just trying to understand the pulse of our community. I've done a couple initiatives to kind of see where people what they believe, whether 2 or 3 terms is appropriate. So I've done so with an electronic poll. That poll went out to a small sample size of 324 people. And from that 324 people sample size, 79% of it were in favor of 2 terms, while 19.8 were in favor of 3 and 1.2 in favor of no term limits. In that poll also, there were some comment sections. I'm going to just read a couple of the more powerful comment sections that were in that poll. Number 1, term-limited politicians would be inclined to vote what is best for their constituents. The second one, I feel like term limits are needed now because politicians in this country are not focused on the needs of the people. Number 3, putting term limits on politicians is a necessary step towards ensuring a healthy and vibrant democracy. Politicians who serve endless terms can become complacent and disconnected from the needs and the concerns of the people they are supposed to represent. Term limits ensure a regular turnover of elected officials, allowing fresh perspectives and new ideas to enter into political landscape. This promotes accountability and prevents the concentration of power in the hands of a few individuals. Moreover, term limits help to prevent the emergence of a political class that is detached from the realities of everyday citizens. By limiting the number of terms a politician can serve, we can encourage a more diverse and inclusive representation, fostering a more responsive and representative government. Here's another one. I believe term limits should be in place for local, state, and federal positions. The President of the United States and the state governors have a limit of 2 4-year terms. The same should apply for the House of Representatives and the Senate. This problem is neither side would vote to pass because the majority is no longer serve we the people like they were elected to, they serve themselves. And the last one is POTUS has term limits, so why should lesser offices have anything less? In addition, I sent a mailer out, and on that mailer, I received 144 responses from community members for 2 term limits. These are the people that took the time to cut out the card and send it back for 2 term limits. So I think there's an argument to be made for 2 term limits is the answer for Harford County. I look forward to a continued conversation with my colleagues. I do appreciate the conversation. With that, that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Mr. Guthrie.
I call this legislation feel-good legislation. I've said that before, and I'll say it again because I did a survey of all the people up there in all those pictures. I did that survey There are 51 people who were elected to these seats, counting the 7 people sitting here now. 51 people. Of the 51 people, 78% of the 51 people elected served 2 terms or less. It's already in place. When you get to 3 terms, it drops to about 7 people, and it keeps getting less. I've served 12 years, and now I'm serving 4 more, so I'm going to serve 16 years, and I'm retiring. I'm done. Only one person ever served 20 years, and that was Rob Wagner, and he just got beat. And he's the only person ever in history of Harford County served 20 years. Right now, I support this bill because I think it's a compromise bill, more than likely. That's why I support it, because it's what I've done, and you think about, there's always this talk about term, and by the way, there's 23 counties, I think, in Baltimore City, in the state of Maryland, and 18 counties don't have term limits. And a lot of them are reversing their situation on term limits. Because if you think about it for a minute, if you own a business, you employ somebody, and they now work 8 years, 2 terms, and then you say, well, they've worked for me for 8 years, they're a great employee, outstanding service. Well, you're fired because you did 2 terms, you're gone. It doesn't happen. There are all kind of people employed across the street for 18, 20, 30 years. Do you tell them just because they've served so long, they no longer have a job? It doesn't make sense. If you have somebody up here that spent a lot of time, they're going to learn their way through the ropes like I did. I can't believe how many things, and I was on a council from 2002 to 2014 and was off the next 8 years. Now I'm back. I can't believe when I've come back how many things helped me knowing all my way around the county, and all the people that are still here that I work with and know how to get things done and talk to people. Can't get everything done, but that's Pat's fault. No, I won't blame him. So I took this bill as a compromise bill. Since 78% of the people who have ever set up here have only done 2 terms or less, and only about 7 more people have done 3 terms. So that's my take on it, and that's why I'm supporting the bill that's before us, 23028.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Anyone else? Mr. Riley?
Yes, I'm also a co-sponsor of this bill. And I hear on the street that there's a smoke screen going out there that the reason why we are putting this through is something to do with a pension. None of the 3 of us will ever receive a pension from this bill. So pension's not even in play. The other thing that I would say is, I don't know why anybody would be against this bill. It's a choice. They can go with whatever's out there, or they can go with this particular bill. So as far as I see it, it's a good choice for the people. The other thing I would say is, Councilman Penman said he got 144 of those letters back. Just remember, there's 100,000 people that vote in Harford County. So 144, that doesn't say that he's got an overwhelming majority to vote for this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing from people tonight and in the future. Just 2 thoughts as Councilman Penman was reading those postcards. I think many of those comments were absent from the local reality of Harford County government and speaking to a larger philosophical conversation of national government or the idea of government. And I think with making a change to the Harford County Charter, we have to think about the realities of Harford County. And just another thought in regards to term limits, because I really think we're at a point where it's going to be one form of term limits or another. It's going to come through petition or come through the council chambers. But, when you create term limits, you increase the risk for political leapfrogging, lily padding. You know, where I did my 8 years on the Harford County Council, I guess I'll run for state delegate, and then I guess I'll run for state senator, and then I guess I'll run, you know, so on and so forth. Whereas when, you know, we're able to stay in these seats, you know, somebody pointed out, I'm a kindergarten teacher. This is not my career. This is a way that I serve back to my community, and with no intentions of going anywhere else in that work. So in promoting the leaving of office at a certain point, you're promoting, you know, somebody to take action so that they can get to their next thing, so that they can fundraise enough to get to that bigger office. And there's that risk for, you know, all the things that people don't like about politics as well, because I only got 8 years to make sure that the people who have money like me, so that they'll support me to get that more expensive seat. So, you know, it's not as simple as you have term limits and corruption goes away. It's a larger, more complicated issue that this doesn't really address. But it's still a worthwhile conversation. And, you know, I think it's also important that we look at what other counties are doing as they move from 2 terms to 3 and so on. But, yep, that's just my quick thoughts for the night.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Giordano?
Thank you, Council President. Just want to piggyback on something Jacob said. I think he's had the opportunity to work with another councilman that's been around for 3 terms or 4 terms that he's gotten a lot of advice from, so you can hear him mention that. And then a couple weeks ago, we actually had the county executive for Howard County, and he said he'd served 13 years on the Howard County Council, and I was like, 13 years, how did that happen? That didn't make sense. And he said he took over for somebody for 1 term, for 1 year, and then he served 3 other terms, and he was term limited under Howard County for 3 terms. Baltimore County doesn't have term limits. Carroll County is looking to go back to 3 terms, so is Anne Arundel County. They're looking to go back to 3 terms. They found it that the other way didn't work. So thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Giordano. Anyone else? Anyone?
There are 4 speakers this evening, Mr. President. Nancy Post, followed by James O'Brien.
Very good. Wow, 4. I think Mr. O'Brien left. He did. Okay. Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Nancy Post, 411 Green Tree Circle. Trust is earned. Trust can be broken. The destruction of Harford County, especially Southern Harford, has broken our trust of Harford officials, elected or not. Loopholes in legislation destroys trust. Citizens hope Harford is in the process of a positive course correction. The positive aspect of term limits is to get rid of bad apples, especially if party line voters do not do so against their own best interests. Mr. Bennett's election shows we can make positive changes in Harford, if only by 1 district at a time. A negative aspect of term limits is that really good officials are removed from office. I learned of another serious negative aspect, one Harford suffers from. It makes it easy for lobbyists and those who hide behind LLCs to have their way. It is easy for lobbyists to peddle their self-interest and agendas to new, green, naive government officials. The frequent turnover of officials would likely enable weak or puppet officials to get elected and do irreversible damage to Harford during their terms. Lobbyists laid the groundwork and continue to satisfy their agendas via Harford officials. Of the money that is reported, we see campaign donations from developers, their lawyers, and other development-related businesses. For example, Mr. Snee, one of the lawyers for the Abingdon Business Park and Perryman Peninsula developers, is one such lobbyist. I was told by a Harford official he had very easy access to Mr. Glassman's office. Mr. Snee was Mr. Penman's campaign manager. I was perplexed why Mr. Penman is one of the term limit supporters, but now I have a better understanding of the possible motives. Mr. Penman's strong concern over protecting developers and not citizens is noted, as we saw tonight. Developers showed their appreciation for his support. Mr. Penman would not recuse himself from votes concerning Abingdon Woods or Perryman Peninsula. He has never responded to my emails. He told me he doesn't have the time. Likely a better explanation is that I have been one of the common sense voices of sanity speaking against the destruction of Abingdon Woods and the county since at least 2019. So I reverse my position on term limits and now state I am against them and against Bill 23028. Fellow Harford citizens, it is up to us to clean out the bad apples with our votes. Pay attention to what is happening in Harford and vote for officials whose actions promote safe, beautiful, and healthy communities in support of Harford citizens.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. O'Brien is here.
Actually, I didn't sign up for term limits, but I just signed up for the bill that I spoke on. But I'm for them.
Whatever number.
No, I mean, I'm in there.
Any number, right?
If you're not signed up, we're not listening to you. Yes, Jim, yes. See.
Emma Peller, followed by Ed Hubner.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Emma Peller, 1447 Redfield Road, Bel Air. Good evening again, members of the council and Council President Vincenti. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. It's been a long one. This time, I'm here to speak in opposition to Bill 23-028. I want to clarify that my opposition is not to term limits, but instead to the exact specifications laid out in this bill. I want to ask that this bill be amended from 3 consecutive terms to 3 lifetime terms as council members and an additional 3 as council president. I believe that this is more in line with the wishes of the citizens of Harford County and around the country. What is the purpose of putting this bill forward if a council member can serve for 3 terms, take 1 term off, or even serve an additional 3 terms as council president, and then return to their original role as a council member? Please consider what exactly people want when they're asking for term limits and amend this bill appropriately. We want new ideas, new generations, and a better chance for newcomers in this county without built-up war chests to have a fair shot at their turn on the dais. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Good evening again. My name is Ed Hubner, 508 Stratford Road in Fallston. And I guess I'm standing between you and your dinner, so I'll be quick. I'm opposed to 23028. Mr. Guthrie, you were a councilman for 12 years, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then your constituents decided not to elect you?
Yes.
And then 8 years later, they decided to elect you?
Yes.
Isn't America a great country?
Great.
Okay.
God bless you.
Penman, this is your first term? Tony G., this is your second.
Mr. Hubner, the council members are not going to respond to you.
Okay, I believe it's your second term. Pat, I believe it's your second term as president. Everybody else, it's their first term. So I don't see where this career politician that this bill is trying to protect us from is. I mean, I think the county has done its job. It's elected new blood when it needed to. It's brought back people when it felt that it needed to.
Old
So
blood.
I don't understand what we're trying to solve here. I think it's my constitutional right to vote for the person that I think represents me, and I don't like laws like this that says I can't vote for the person that I want because he's already served 2 terms or 3 terms. I mean, this is not the Senate of the United States, the House of Representatives of the United States. This is the Harford County Council. And I'm very, very concerned that when we start term limiting people, we increase the influence of people that are not elected officials to determine who we get to vote for and don't get to vote for, and we increase the influence of the staff that stays and just gets recycled by councilman to councilman to councilman. So I have an honest concern about this bill, but thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
There are no more speakers, Mr. President.
All right, with no other speakers, this will conclude the public hearing on Bill 23-028, and we will adjourn these public hearings. Thank you.